Chapter 252. Not good. Seeing this unexpected scene, everyone from Sydney Hill, including Gray, turned pale. For the time being, they did not know who was controlling the plants and vines. However, they could not allow Rob Tracy to escape. If he did, it would be a disaster for all of them present. A barbarian blood warrior who hated them. Just thinking about it made their hair stand on end. Who is it? Mantle Sidney's expression also changed abruptly. He could naturally imagine the consequences of Rob Tracy's escape. Swish, swish, swish. He used his blood beast ability. A large number of metal blades quickly appeared, covering the sky and sweeping across a small part of the sky. Accompanied by an ear-piercing whistling sound, they attacked the plants and vines, as well as Rob Tracy, who was wrapped up by the plants and vines like countless cannonballs. As for himself, after using his blood fiend ability, he quickly chased after them. He could not let Rob Tracy escape. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Swish, swish, swish. A large number of metal blades fell from the sky like a metal rain, covering Rob Tracy and the plants and vines that wrapped around him. The plants and vines were about to be torn apart and Rob Tracy into minced meat. At this moment, swish, swish, swish. A large number of plants and vines spread out from the woods, covering the sky and the sun. They quickly blocked the vines that wrapped around Rob Tracy, forming a huge barrier made of vines, like a huge cloud that covered the sky. Boom, boom, boom. The metal blades hit the vines, causing violent explosions. A large number of vines were smashed, and green plant debris splashed everywhere. But there were too many vines, and after they were broken, they immediately grew back. In the end, all the metal blades were blocked and could not pierce the cloud made of vines. The vines that wrapped around Rob Tracy, under the unwilling gaze of everyone, retreated into the woods and disappeared into the depths of the woods. How could it be? Who is manipulating these plants to be able to block Sir Marner's attack? Gray's expression changed, not only because Rob Tracy's figure had disappeared into the woods, but also because someone could control the plants to resist the attack of Mantle Sidney, a barbarian blood warrior who practiced a special blood technique. The person controlling the plants was at least a barbarian blood warrior. Knowing this, the other people in Sydney Hill couldn't help but change their expressions. There was actually a barbarian blood warrior in the forest. This time, the operation to encircle and annihilate the Shadow Serpent was not going smoothly. First, an unexpected barbaric-level blood fiend appeared. It wasn't easy to kill the barbarian-level blood fiend and severely injure Rob Tracy. Now, another barbarian-level warrior had appeared and rescued Rob Tracy. Swish, swish, swish. Seeing that the plants had blocked all the metal blades, Mantle Sidney's expression changed, but he quickly used his blood beast ability. Countless metal blades floated up again and flew in the direction where Rob Tracy had disappeared. Boom, boom, boom. There was a violent explosion again. Countless plants and vines appeared again and intertwined into a wall of vines. Although a lot of it was damaged, it blocked Mantle Sidney's attack again. The woods were in a mess, but the direction where Rob Tracy had disappeared was not damaged at all. Damn it! Mantle Sidney frowned and hesitated for a moment, then immediately chased into the woods. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Just then, a large number of vines swept out from the woods and quickly attacked him. Puff! Mantle Sidney dodged and dodged dozens of vines that were densely attacking him. The long sword in his hand flashed with blue light and slashed out. He cut off a few vines that were attacking him, cleared a path, and continued to rush into the woods. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. But he had just taken a few steps when more vines spread out from the woods. He dodged left and right and slashed out with the magic sword in his hand, but he could no longer get close to the woods. The road ahead had been blocked by many vines. What? You still don't want to give up? A voice suddenly sounded, and then a thick vine stretched out. On the vine stood an old man with a face full of wrinkles. Mantle Sidney, you should know that in places with plants, you will never be my match. Puff! Seeing this person, Mantle Sidney's expression changed slightly, and a hint of fear flashed in his eyes. He quickly retreated to the edge of the woods, And then he looked at the old man on the huge vine with hatred in his eyes. Ralph Wallen, it really is you. Wallen. Seeing the person who suddenly appeared and hearing Marnell Sidney's name, Gray's heart skipped a beat. His expression changed, and he understood who the other party was. Among the 3 dukes and 7 marquises of the Purple Moon Kingdom, there was a marquis family with the surname Wallen. He had the strength of at least a barbarian blood warrior, and his surname was Wallen. The other party could only be from this family. And Gray also knew that the relationship between the Sidney family and the Wallen family was extremely bad. If he was from the Wallen family, it was understandable that he saved Rob Tracy, who was the enemy of the Sidney family. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. This principle obviously applied in this world as well. The Marquis family is from the Wallen family? Why would someone from Marquis Warren's family appear here? Not only Gray, but many people in the Sidney Hill understood the identity of the person who suddenly appeared, and their expressions changed. The Wallen family was the enemy of the Sidney family. Rob Tracy had fallen into the hands of the other party, and it would be difficult to get the other party to hand him over. And the other party from the Marquis family must have practiced a special blood technique, and his combat power was not necessarily weaker than Marnell Sidney's. In addition, he had the advantage of an environment that was beneficial to his ability. It was almost impossible to kill Rob Tracy. Ralph Wallen, hand over Rob Tracy. Looking at the other party, Marnell Sidney's eyes were spitting fire as he gritted his teeth. Because of his anger, the wrinkles on his old face kept trembling. He had already seriously injured Rob Tracy and only needed one last strike to kill Rob Tracy. But at this time, the other party suddenly appeared and saved him. It was easy to imagine his anger, and in his anger, he could not help but worry. If Rob Tracy succeeded in surviving today, the Sidney Hill would probably never have a day of peace after today. You know, that's impossible. Ralph Wallen shook his head lightly, but he felt a little regretful in his heart. If he had not received the news too late and arrived one step too late, he would not have just saved Rob Tracy, but directly joined forces with Rob Tracy to kill Marnell Sidney here. Although the kingdom had a ban that prohibited the killing of nobles and nobles who were directly in theft by the kingdom, as long as it was done cleanly and without leaving any evidence. Even if there were suspicions later, the other party's family would not be able to do anything. In fact, he came with this goal in mind. Unfortunately, he was one step too late. When he arrived, Rob Tracy was already seriously injured and on the verge of death. His combat power was almost zero. Bastard! Marnell Sidney's face was full of anger. A large amount of metal powder floated up and turned into metal blades that attacked Ralph Wallen. Boom, boom, boom. Ralph Wallen did not move, but a large number of vines swept out and blocked in front of Ralph Wallen, blocking all the metal blades. The attack of the metal blades disappeared, and his figure appeared again. Even his clothes were not messed up. He looked at Marnell Sidney and said with a hint of mockery, "Although I want to fight you, now is not the time. If I delay any longer, someone will die." As he spoke, the huge vine that he was standing on quickly retreated into the forest and soon disappeared into the woods. Puff, puff, puff. A large number of metal blades attacked the forest, and a large area of the forest was razed to the ground. However, there was no sign of the other party and Rob Tracy. Whoosh, whoosh. Taking advantage of the sudden appearance of a powerful enemy, the purple-haired man, the short brown-haired man, and several members of the Shadow Serpent with the strength of a ferocious warrior broke out of the encirclement and fled out of the village. Not good. Seeing these people break out of the encirclement, Gray's expression changed. Rob Tracy had been rescued. If these people escaped, then this encirclement of the Shadow Serpent could be considered a failure. He immediately prepared to chase after these people, but just as he was about to do so, he suddenly heard a cold snort. He saw Marnell Sidney's cold eyes looking at the purple-haired man and the short brown-haired man who were escaping. Then, a large number of metal blades whizzed out in the direction of these 4 people. He stopped and looked in the direction of the purple-haired man and the short brown-haired man. With Marnell Sidney, a barbarian blood warrior, the result could be imagined. As expected, puff, puff, puff. Under the metal blades, the purple-haired man, the short brown-haired man, and the others as well as the area around them, were suddenly riddled with holes, one after another. Thud! Only a few people with the strength of a ferocious warrior had their eyes wide open, and with unwillingness in their eyes, they directly fell down. Their bodies were full of holes, and from the holes, blood gushed out like spring water. Thud! The purple-haired man and the short brown-haired man were full of sharp blades. They staggered, and after running a few steps forward, they also fell down. Their life force gradually disappeared from their bodies. Gray was able to block Rob Tracy's attack because Gray's strength was very close to the barbarian level, and Rob Tracy's fighting strength was only average among the barbarian blood warriors. The purple-haired man and the short brown-haired man's fighting strength was only average among the berserk blood warriors. Facing a barbarian blood warrior who cultivated a special technique, they could not even block a wave of attacks. Chapter 253. The village was in a mess. Most of the houses had collapsed, and not a single intact house could be seen. On the snowy ground, corpses lay on the ground. Blood dyed the snow red. Rob Tracy had been rescued with serious injuries, and the purple-haired man and the short-haired man had been killed. The others naturally could not resist. In the end, apart from Rob Tracy, all the members of the Shadow Serpent, a total of 157 people, had been killed. However, the people of Sydney had paid a price. 5 ferocious warriors had died in battle, and the others were more or less injured. Father, Viscount Fergus walked over, and Gray looked at him. He was not worried about his safety. With the protection of his arm, even a berserk warrior would not be able to kill him in a short period of time. Against a ferocious warrior, it was even more impossible. As expected, although his clothes were damaged in many places, he was not injured. The protection of his arm had protected him. On the other hand, Gray himself was injured. Walking in front of Gray, Viscount Fergus frowned and looked at the wounds on Gray's body. How are your injuries? They're not serious. I should be fine after half a month of recuperation. Gray judged as he moved his left arm and touched the wound on his abdomen. This was under the condition that he did not use his reverse nurturing ability. If he had, this injury would have been healed in an instant. Of course, Gray did not intend to do so now. At the very least, he would have to wait until he returned to Fergus Castle. Otherwise, it would be difficult to explain. After checking and confirming that Gray's judgment was correct, Viscount Fergus took out some ointment and treated Gray's wounds. He also used a white cloth to bind the wounds on Gray's body. After doing this, he could not help but look at the Windrider leopard on the ground. Its bones had been crushed, and it looked like a pile of mud. He also looked at the Jade Lizard and the Ox Blood Fiend, whose bodies were covered in wounds and whose skulls were exposed. It can't be repaired anymore. He knew that Gray had the ability to repair the wounds on the Blood Fiends. Gray's explanation was that it was an ability that came with magical weapons. His brain has been damaged beyond repair. Gray shook his head. We can only hunt and replenish them. What a pity! Viscount Fergus felt that it was a pity. Putting aside the Ox-type Blood Fiends, the Windrider Leopard and the Jade Lizard were both Blood Fiends that could unleash the power of a Berserker. Such Blood Fiends were not easy to encounter. The next time he hunted a Berserk-level Blood Fiend, its combat power might not be comparable to these 2 Blood Fiends. He knew that Gray had the corpse of a Cercopithecus. If he could control the Cercopithecus, it would be even more powerful than the previous 4 Blood Fiends combined. However, it was clear that the 4 Berserk-level Blood Fiends were more useful in protecting the Fergus family. After all, placing the 4 Berserk Blood Fiends in Fergus Castle would definitely be more effective than having a single Cercopithecus. Sometimes, numbers were an advantage. Viscount Fergus Gray. Zaloyang walked over with a look of surprise on his face. It was hard to imagine that Gray, who was younger than him by a few years, had already surpassed him and become a Berserker. However, his performance during the battle could not be faked. The other party was indeed a Berserker. Young Master Zaloyang. Gray and Viscount Fergus greeted him respectfully. You actually became a Berserker without a word. You are now completely ahead of me. Zaloyang exclaimed as he stared at Gray. He was not someone who did not have tolerance for others. He would not be hostile towards others just because they were stronger than him. Besides, as long as the Sidney family still had the powerful trump card of the Copperback Dragon, he was not worried about not being able to suppress the other party, unless the other party could grow into a king-level warrior. If the other party could really become a king-level warrior, there would be no need to suppress him. Even the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom would treat him with respect. Only a fool would think of suppressing the other party. Of course, although the other party was now a berserker, Zaloyang felt that it was impossible for the other party to become a king-level warrior. To become a king-level warrior, one not only needed talent, but also resources. In order to cultivate to the king level, one needed the blood essence of a king-level blood fiend. In addition, one also needed a huge amount of training resources. These were all obstacles that were almost impossible to overcome. This was also why, since the founding of the Purple Moon Kingdom 1,000 years ago, king-level warriors had only appeared in the 3 ducal families, but not in the Marquis family. Without enough resources, it was impossible to give birth to a powerhouse of that level. I was just lucky. When I was exploring a ruin, besides obtaining that magic weapon, I also obtained some high-level blood fiend's blood. That's why my strength improved so quickly. Gray said the reason he had thought of before. No need to be humble. Luck is also a part of strength. Zaloyang patted Gray's shoulder and smiled. Indeed, luck is also a part of strength. Mantle Sidney walked over and added, if Gray was still a berserker, even if he could control for berserker blood fiends, Mantle Sidney would not be too concerned. After all, the 4 berserker blood fiends were dead and could not grow, so their combat strength would not increase with time. However, Gray was now a berserker, so Mantle Sidney could not help but pay more attention to him. This was because the other party's strength could grow, and there was a possibility that he could become a berserker in the future. As for whether he could become even stronger, it would depend on his luck. The Wind Wolf sequence's desolate level and above Blood Fiend's blood essence were not easy to obtain. Even the Sidney family did not have them. Lord Mantle, Gray, and Viscount Fergus greeted him respectfully. You're welcome. Mantle Sidney nodded slightly and looked at Gray. This time, it's all thanks to you for temporarily stopping Rob Tracy for me. Otherwise, I'm afraid we would have suffered heavy losses. This is what I should do, Gray hurriedly said. At the mention of Rob Tracy, Gray, Viscount Fergus, and Zero Young could not help but look gloomy. They had almost killed him, but in the end, he had been rescued by the Wallen family, and all their efforts had been for naught. Granduncle, Rob Tracy was rescued by the Wallen family. What should we do now? Zero Young asked worriedly. We need to inform the Marquis of the situation here as soon as possible and see if we can pressure the Wallen family to hand over Rob Tracy. If not, we need to be more vigilant in the future. Mantle Sidney frowned. Of course, there's no need to worry too much. Rob Tracy has been seriously injured by me, and it's not certain that he can be saved. Moreover, the other party's injuries are very serious. Even if he can be saved, he will need to recuperate for a long time to recover. He's not young anymore, and after he recovers, he may not be able to maintain the strength of a berserker. Understand. Zero Young heaved a sigh of relief. Viscount Fergus and Gray were slightly relieved. Of course, they could not help but feel anxious. Sir Mantle, young Master Zero Young, has found a secret room in the village. At this time, a noble who had been searching the village came to report. Lead the way. Mantle Sidney nodded and led Zero Young to the secret room. Gray and Viscount Fergus did not follow. It did not matter whether they went or not. In the end, they would definitely benefit a lot, but the lion's share would definitely go to the Sidney family. Viscount Fergus, Gray. Seeing Mantle Sidney and Zero Young leave, a dozen people under Earl Ford's lead came forward to greet Gray and Viscount Gray. Among them was Baron Iveline, who had a marriage alliance with the Fergus family. Although I already knew that Gray was extremely talented, I did not expect that Gray was already a berserker, Earl Ford said with a smile. There was a trace of unconcealable shock in his eyes. At this moment, he was extremely glad that he had made the decision to befriend the Fergus family. Obviously, that decision was extremely correct. Facts had proven that the Fergus family was indeed a family worth befriending. Not only did they possess a magic weapon that could control berserker blood fiends, but they also had a berserker. It was almost certain that they would be promoted to an earl's family. Roping in a future count's family to his side would be extremely advantageous in the confrontation with the Smalley family. He also just became a berserker not long ago. Viscount Fergus maintained a humble attitude and responded with a smile. However, he felt a burst of pride in his heart. Although the one who became a berserker was not him, but Gray, in his opinion, there was no difference between Gray becoming a berserker and him becoming a berserker. Both could increase the combat power of the Fergus family. Most importantly, both could help the Fergus family fight for the Earl's position that they had longed for a long time. I really envy you for having such a talented child like Gray. Earl Ford sighed with a smile. Young Master Twain's talent is not bad. It's inevitable that he will become a berserker. It's not impossible for him to become a berserker, Viscount Fergus said with a smile. Then he looked at Baron Iveline, who was among the dozen or so people, and he nodded to show his respect. Baron Iveline, Bernice is already pregnant. She misses you very much. Please visit the Fergus family often in the future. Of course. Seeing that Viscount Fergus specially greeted him, Baron Iveline's face was full of smiles. He could feel that after Viscount Fergus greeted him, the gazes of the people from the other families couldn't help but become somewhat friendly. With this layer of relationship with the Fergus family, the Evelyn family wouldn't be too bad in the future. Many family members were already considering building a good relationship with the Iveline family. Building a good relationship with the Iveline family and building a good relationship with the Fergus family was also a good choice. Chapter 254. While Gray and Viscount Fergus were surrounded by more than 10 people, someone's mood was extremely bad. What a piece of trash. A barbarian blood warrior against a berserker, and he couldn't even seriously injure him. Glancing at Gray, who was surrounded by a group of people and was not seriously injured, Count Smalley's face darkened. During the battle, although he didn't want Gray to be killed by the Shadow Serpent's barbarian blood warrior, he didn't expect that not only was Gray not killed, his injuries weren't too serious. This made him extremely dissatisfied with the Shadow Serpent's barbarian blood warrior. If a barbarian blood warrior couldn't even kill a berserker, how could he be considered a barbarian blood warrior? If the resentment in one's heart could kill, Rob Tracy would have been killed by him many times. Damn it! How can his cultivation speed be so fast? He's already a berserker. Apart from Count Smalley, the most dissatisfied person was probably Viscount Likens. When Gray became a vicious warrior, the Richens family's chances of winning in the fight for the Count's position were not high. But now they had no chance of winning. After all, the other party had already met the requirements to be promoted to a Count's family. And in the battle just now, his contribution was also great. After returning, the Sidney family could directly promote the Fergus family to a Count's position. After all, the other party had already become a berserker at such a young age. His future potential was huge. Although he was unhappy, if it was him, he would probably make the same choice. He's already a berserker. Viscount Baymai, the only woman in the group, frowned slightly. Although she didn't have a strong resentment like Viscount Likens, she was still somewhat unwilling. She also yearned to lead her family to become a Count's family. But now, it seemed that there was no hope. A Marquis family could at most be in theft with 3 Counts. Now that they already had 2 in the Fergus family, the Baymai family was doomed to have no hope. A week later, outside Sidney Castle, in the sky, snowflakes fell like goose feathers, and the surrounding ground was covered with snow. Marquis Sidney, his wife, Polly, and the Marquis' second son, Darren Sidney, stood in front of the castle, waiting solemnly. "Father, is Gray really a berserker?" Polly was wearing a white fur coat. Her blonde hair was tied into a ponytail, and her delicate face was slightly red from the cold. She looked at Marquis Sidney in surprise. Yes, the letters Aloyan sent back mentioned that he is indeed a berserker. Facing his surprised daughter's question, Marquis Sidney nodded affirmatively. Not only the other party, even he could not help but feel surprised when he first heard this news. He wasn't even 20 years old, yet he was already a berserker. This rate of growth was too fast. At the very least, Zaloyan couldn't compare. If it wasn't for the fact that the young man was from a Viscount's family, he would have thought that the young man was from a duke's family or even a member of the Purple Moon Kingdom's royal family. A berserker who's not even 20 years old. What a fast cultivation speed. He's actually faster than Zaloyan. Marchioness Jatina exclaimed. At the same time, she glanced at her daughter, Polly. Although she had heard that Polly and Zaloyan had dined together last time, and the two seemed to have a good relationship, she didn't think too deeply about it. Zaloyan's talent at that time was not bad, but his status was much lower. Not to mention the son of a Viscount's family. Even the son of a Count's family was a little inferior to Polly's. But now, with the talent that the other party had displayed, she couldn't help but pay more attention to this matter. With the potential that Zaloyan had shown, it was very likely that he would become a berserker. Although his status was a little inferior, this potential made up for it. He actually managed to defeat that fellow Zaloyan. The Marquis's second son, Darren Sidney, was also surprised. Ever since he was young, his relationship with Zaloyan had been terrible, not only because Zaloyan was chosen by the Marquis as the next successor to the title, but also because Zaloyan's cultivation speed had always surpassed his. No matter how hard he tried, he could not catch up to Zaloyan. Because of this deep unwillingness to accept defeat, he could not help but feel antagonistic towards Zaloyan. But now, there was someone whose cultivation speed was faster than Zaloyan's, and this person was from a Viscount family in the territory. This surprised him and even somewhat impressed him. He had not been able to trample Zaloyan underfoot, but someone else had. He was actually a little happy. Father, Marquis, Lord Marquis. Not long after, a team stopped outside Sidney Castle. Zaloyan, Mantle Sidney, Gray, and the others stepped out of the carriage and greeted Marquis Sidney. Thank you for your hard work. Marquis Sidney's gaze swept over everyone and paused on Gray for a moment. I'm ashamed to have allowed Rob Tracy to be rescued. Mantle Sidney's wrinkled face was a little ashamed. Rob Tracy's escape would inevitably increase the instability of the territory. Uncle, don't blame yourself. No one would have thought that the Wallen family would suddenly appear. If it had been me at that time, I would have had the same outcome. Although Rob Tracy escaped in the end, the result is still good. At least the Shadow Serpent organization has been destroyed. Marquis Sidney shook his head. This time, although an accident had occurred in the end and Rob Tracy had been rescued, their goal of destroying the Shadow Serpent organization had still been achieved. At least now, he only had to worry about Rob Tracy, not the other assassins of the Shadow Serpent. Simply put, he had changed from worrying about a group of people to worrying about one person. In terms of the result, it was obviously a good thing. I'm sure you're all tired after such a long journey. The castle has already prepared accommodations for you. Go and rest first. We'll celebrate at the banquet. Following Marquis Sidney's signal, the castle servants immediately came forward to lead the way. Yes, Lord Marquis. Gray and the others responded respectfully and dispersed under the guidance of the servants. Gray, Uncle Fergus. At this time, Polly came forward and greeted the two of them. Miss Polly. Gray and Marquis Sidney responded politely. Gray, I didn't expect you to already be a berserker. When we saw the letter written by Big Brother, all of us were shocked. Looking at Gray, Polly's gaze was somewhat teasing. I just became a berserker not long ago. Gray smiled embarrassedly. Well, I'll let you off this time. Polly's beautiful eyebrows wrinkled slightly, but she didn't argue with Gray. She also knew that each family had their own secrets. Many times, it was inconvenient to disclose many things to outsiders. Gray, are you injured? Then she looked at Gray's arm and abdomen, faintly visible bandages, and her beautiful eyebrows wrinkled slightly again. I'm a little injured, but it's not serious. Gray nodded slightly. Do you need a healing potion? Polly asked worriedly. It's just a little injury. It should be fine in a few days. There's no need for a healing potion. Gray shook his head. The Fergus family bought a portion of healing potions every year, so Viscount Fergus had some. Originally, Viscount Fergus wanted to give it to Gray, but Gray refused. It was better to use the healing potion at a critical moment. Injuries like his did not need healing potions at all. When he returned to Fergus Castle, he would find a forest and used the reverse nurturing ability to recover immediately. It was not worthwhile to waste a bottle of healing potion for this. This kind of thing could save his life at a critical moment. All right then. Polly's delicate eyebrows raised as she said, "You two must be tired, so I won't disturb you." Under the guidance of the servant, Gray and Polly went to the residence arranged for them in Sydney Castle. Polly went straight to a huge, independent 3-story house in the backyard of the castle and entered one of the rooms. There were many wooden cabinets around the room, and there were several long tables in the middle. There were many oddly shaped crystal vessels on the long table. After entering the room, she went straight to the side of a wooden cabinet and pulled open the drawer. Polly. Because of his injuries, Gray could not take a bath and could only wipe his body, but it was still much more comfortable. But when he walked out of the bathroom, he was surprised to find Polly waiting in the living room. "Gray, this is for you." Seeing Gray, Polly stood up and handed a small bronze bottle to Gray. The words, "healing potion," were clearly written on the surface of the bottle. There's no need. My injuries will be fine in a few days. There's no need for healing potions." Seeing the words, "healing potion," on the bottle, Gray did not reach out to take the bottle. Healing potions were very precious, and the key was that they were priceless. Without the corresponding connections, it was impossible to buy them. It was not good to accept such a precious item for no reason. "You're injured now, and it's not convenient for you to take a bath. And because my teacher can make healing potions are not too expensive in the castle," Polly explained with a smile, as if she saw Gray's thoughts. Then, "All right, thank you." After some thought, Gray finally reached out to take the bottle. It was true that it was not convenient to take a bath with his injuries, especially in the winter. Taking a bath in the cold was not a comfortable experience. Although it had the ability to reverse nurture, it could not be used in Sydney Castle for the next few days. It had to continue like this. Of course, he was not someone who could accept gifts from others, especially when the other party was a girl. He would take it as owing her a favor, and if there was a chance in the future, he would repay it. "All right, I won't disturb your rest." Polly nodded to Gray and turned to leave with a smile. Chapter 255. In the Marquis' study, Zaloyan and Marnell Sidney, who had just returned to the castle, followed Marquis Sidney here. "Father, how's the negotiation with the Wallen family going? Are they willing to hand over Rob Tracy?" Zaloyan asked as soon as they entered the study. The Wallen family refused directly. Marquis Sidney shook his head and said with a cold look in his eyes, "The people we sent didn't even get to see Marquis Wallen before they were chased out. They've gone too far." Marnell Sidney clenched his fists, his eyes full of anger. The people they sent were chased out before they even got to see Wallen. This was a naked humiliation. "Father, we have to teach the Wallen family a lesson. Otherwise, the Wallen family will only think that the Sidney family is easy to bully." Zaloyan's eyes were also full of anger. As a member of the Sidney family, he was furious to learn that the Sidney family had been humiliated like this. "I know." Marquis Sidney nodded with a hint of coldness in his eyes. "Since the Whalen family was the one who started this, don't blame the Sidney family for being too ruthless." "Father, are you going to?" Seeing that Marquis Sidney had made a decision, Zaloyan couldn't help but ask. The Wallen family built the castle in the forest because of their planability. "Humph, this time I'll let the Wallen family have a good taste of the beast tide." Marquis Sidney's eyes were cold. As a marquis in charge of a large territory, he was naturally decisive when facing enemies. Even if he knew that many innocent people would be involved, he wouldn't hesitate at all. He had never been a soft-hearted person. Beast tide? Hearing about the beast tide, Zaloyan and Marnell Sidney were shocked. They immediately understood Marquis Sidney's plan. However, the two of them had no intention of stopping him. In fact, they were very supportive of him. Although this might hurt the innocent, those people were not citizens of Sydney, so why would they care? "All right, let's not talk about the Wallen family for now. You mentioned in the letter that Gray Fergus is already a berserker. Tell me the details." Marquis Sidney waved his hand and interrupted the conversation. "Yes." Both Zaloyan and Marnell Sidney nodded and hurriedly recounted what they had seen during the battle, as well as their subsequent conversation. "Ruins? That's good luck. When he heard that Gray had found a ruin and obtained a magical weapon that could control blood fiends, as well as the blood of a high-level blood fiend, he could not help but sigh at Gray's good luck. Moreover, his blood fiend's ability has mutated and gained an additional ice attribute. His combat power is now comparable to a special blood fiend of the same level. Manel Sidney added, mutated? Increased the ice attribute? It seems that he must have taken some kind of high-level blood fiend's blood with the ice attribute. Marquis Sidney raised his eyebrows. Both of us think so, too. He must have taken some kind of high-level blood fiend's ability to mutate and increase its power. Both Zaloyan and Marnell Sidney nodded. They had a rich collection of books in their family and were very knowledgeable about blood techniques. They all knew that the blood of high-level blood fiends had the ability to mutate the original blood fiend's ability. Of course, the probability of such a mutation occurring was not very high. It involved the relationship between the blood of the blood fiend and one's level. Generally speaking, the greater the difference between the blood of the blood fiend and one's level, the easier it was to cause such a mutation. The smaller the difference, the smaller the possibility of mutation. In fact, Zaloyan had taken the blood of the desolate level blood fiend killed by the copperback dragon. Unfortunately, after taking it for so long, no mutation had occurred. Father, the Fergus family contributed a lot to the encirclement of the Shadow Serpent. What are your plans for the Fergus family? Zaloyan asked. I'm still hesitating. What do you two think? Marquis Sidney said solemnly. Since the Fergus family has met the requirements to be promoted to an Earl family, I think the Fergus family should be promoted to an Earl family. Zaloyan said seriously. I also think the Fergus family should be promoted to an Earl family, but there's a problem. Marnell Sidney frowned slightly. The position of the head of the Fergus family is still held by Emerson Fergus. According to the rules, the head of an Earl family must at least have the strength of a berserker. He's obviously not satisfied. I'm also considering this problem. Marquis Sidney nodded and said, with the potential the Fergus family had shown, they would certainly be able to become the left and right arms of the Sidney family in the future, just like the two Earl families, or even surpass them. Naturally, he was very happy to promote the Fergus family to an Earl family. However, the trouble was that Gray Fergus wasn't the head of the Fergus family yet, so he didn't have the title of Earl. The three discussed for a while, then asked someone to invite Viscount Fergus. Soon after, under the guidance of servant, Viscount Fergus walked into Marquis Sidney's study with a nervous heart. Lord Marquis, Lord Marnell, young Master Zaloyan. Seeing the three people in the study, he hurriedly bowed. Sit. Marquis Sidney motioned for Viscount Fergus, Marnell Sidney, and Zaloyan to sit on a fur sofa next to him. Marquis Sidney said, I called you here mainly to discuss the matter of the Fergus family being promoted to an Earl family. The matter of the Fergus family being promoted to an Earl family. Hearing this, Viscount Fergus first felt his heart skip a beat, then it started beating wildly again. Being promoted to an Earl family. This was the long-cherished wish of the Fergus family for generations. The previous head of the Fergus family, his father, died in the war with the Flame Kingdom in order to accumulate military merits. He didn't expect that there would finally be a turnaround in his generation. It took him a while to calm down. Seeing that Viscount Fergus had calmed down a little, Marquis Sidney continued. The Fergus family's contributions to the Sidney family over the years have been noted by the Sidney family. In terms of military merits, Gray Fergus is now a berserker. In principle, the Fergus family already has the qualifications to be promoted to an Earl family. But hearing Marquis Sidney say, but Viscount Fergus's heart thumped. His heart was in his throat for fear of hearing bad news. But now the head of the Fergus family is still you, and not Gray Fergus, who is already a berserker. This is different from the condition of being promoted to an Earl family. Hearing that Gray couldn't be promoted to an Earl family because he wasn't the head of the Fergus family yet, Viscount Fergus was a little reluctant. After all, he wasn't too old now, but he didn't hesitate and immediately said, Lord Marquis, I will pass the position of head of the family to Gray as soon as possible. Between losing the position of head of the family and letting the Fergus family become an Earl family, he naturally knew what to choose. Don't make a decision so early. Listen to me first. Marquis Sidney waved his hand, indicating that Viscount Fergus should listen to him. Because Grey is still too young and lacks experience in governing a territory, and after being promoted to an earl family, there are many things about the territory that need to be dealt with. Grey may not be able to handle it. The Sidney family has thought of a compromise. You can grant Grey Fergus the position of heir to the title, and the Sidney family will make an exception and promote the Fergus family to an earl family. Grant Grey the position of heir to the title, and promote the Fergus family to an earl family. Viscount Fergus's face showed surprise. He didn't expect the Sidney family to make such a proposal. Of course, this method is a bit disadvantageous for Grey. You need to go back and discuss this matter with Grey. Whether Grey inherits the title directly or through granting Grey the position of heir to the title, it's up to you. Marquis Sidney said. Yes, Lord Marquis. Viscount Fergus said seriously. The Fergus family has been confirmed to be promoted to an earl family. Hearing the news brought back by Viscount Fergus, Grey's face couldn't help but show surprise. He didn't expect the Sidney family to really promote the Fergus family to an earl family. On the way back, he and Viscount Fergus only thought about it for a while and didn't have much confidence. He didn't expect that they would really be promoted to an earl family. Yes, Viscount Fergus couldn't help but smile, and then said with a serious face, "But this isn't unconditional. The Marquis has given you two options, either directly inheriting the title or granting you the position of heir to the title. Only when one of these two conditions is met can the Fergus family be promoted to an earl family. Grey, what do you think? Just grant me the position of heir to the title." Without much hesitation, Grey made his choice. The title of earl was indeed tempting, but it was also very tiring. He was not yet 20 years old, and he really didn't want to put his energy into governing the territory. Moreover, he didn't have the ability to govern the territory now. The period when he had just been promoted to an earl family could be said to be the most chaotic period of the territory. He didn't want to do such a thankless thing. Most importantly, if he inherited the title, it would inevitably drag down his cultivation because of excessive social activities. For him, compared to governing the territory, the improvement of his own strength was the most important. And according to his view of the nature of the world, in this world, the most important thing was always strength. Other things such as power and wealth were secondary. With strength, power and wealth would be obtained. Without strength, even if you had power and wealth, you couldn't last long. "Grey, you don't have to care about me," Viscount Fergus said seriously when he saw Grey choose the latter without hesitation. "No, father, I didn't make this choice because of you." Grey shook his head. "I'm not yet 20 years old. Compared to governing the territory, I want to spend more energy on cultivation." "All right then, since you insist." Viscount Fergus didn't say anything more when he saw Grey say so. In fact, he also wanted to sit on the title of earl. It wouldn't take too long, just a few years, and enjoy the addiction of the title. Chapter 256. In the evening, in the Sidney family's banquet hall. In the elegantly decorated banquet hall, several ruined furnaces were placed in the corners of the banquet hall, emitting heat to maintain the temperature of the banquet hall, making the entire banquet hall as warm as spring. The surviving members of the various families were dressed in exquisite formal attire, holding crystal goblets filled with mellow wine. They gathered in groups of 3 to 5, and the sound of glasses clinking could be heard from time to time. They were lucky to have not died like their 5 companions. Not only that, but they would also receive rich rewards from the Sidney family. Of course, the 5 companions who died would also receive rewards, but the rewards would belong to their families. At the same time, their families would also receive a considerable amount of compensation. Even so, they still did not want to become one of the 5 companions. Aristocrats liked to enjoy life, and only when they were alive could they have the ability to do so. If they died, even if there were many rewards, they would not have the fortune to enjoy them. Baron Twain. Baron Majeri. In the banquet hall, Grey, under the guidance of Viscount Fergus, greeted the aristocratic families that were on good terms with the Fergus family. He was dressed in a black tuxedo. His posture was tall and straight, and his face was delicate and pretty, coupled with his slightly elegant black hair and deep blue eyes. Although he was not extremely handsome, he had a unique temperament. The injuries on his body had completely healed. The effect of the healing potion was very remarkable. After consuming it, Gray's injuries were recovering at a speed that could be seen with the naked eye. Of course, there were some side effects. During the process of consumption, the injured areas would become very itchy. After all, the cells in the body were rapidly growing, and there would definitely be some external reactions. In addition, although this potion was also effective for bone damage, it was not as fast as treating physical injuries. After all, bone fractures required a very long time to heal. Naturally, Gray did not have any fractures. Even when his left arm was directly slashed by Rob Tracy, there was only a deep wound. The internal bones did not crack or shatter, which was why he was able to heal so quickly. After the incident, he couldn't help but marvel at the power of the iron-armed ape's iron arms. If he had the chance to encounter a blood beast of a higher order than the iron-armed ape, he would definitely reserve an opportunity for it to consume blood. After taking a stroll around the banquet hall and accompanying Viscount Fergus to greet the nobles he was familiar with, Gray headed in a certain direction. There was a young woman in a purple dress with her blonde hair tied up. The long dress was adorned with gemstones, and it was strangely eye-catching. What was even more eye-catching was the young woman. Her slender waist, long legs, and curvaceous upper body were perfectly displayed under the jewel-studded purple dress. Gray. Seeing Gray walk over, the young woman smiled and greeted Gray. She was Polly. Very beautiful. Gray smiled and praised. Seeing a woman dressed up, Gray wasn't so stunned that he pretended not to see her. He knew that he should praise her at this time, and he didn't lie at all. Thank you. Polly's face was slightly flushed as she thanked him softly. How are your injuries? They're almost healed, thanks to the healing medicine you gave me. Gray moved his body slightly as a gesture. No need. Polly shook her head slightly. Speaking of which, I should be the one thanking you. I heard from Granduncle that if you hadn't taken the initiative to block Rob Tracy, he would have been in danger when faced with the siege of Rob Tracy and a barbaric-level blood beast. I was only trying to save myself, Greg said with a smile. What he said was the truth. If he had the confidence to protect himself, he wouldn't have foolishly blocked Rob Tracy and faced danger head-on. What are you chatting about? You look so happy. Zaloyan walked over and joked with a smile. What do you mean? Polly rebuked unhappily. Is that so? In other words, you feel that chatting with Gray is very boring. Zaloyan pretended to be surprised. I didn't say that. Gray, don't listen to his nonsense. Big brother, if you continue to be like this, I won't talk to you in the future, Polly said angrily. Zaloyan's teasing made her anxious. I surrender. Zaloyan spread out his hands, looking as if he had surrendered his weapon. Young Master Zaloyan. Seeing that the two siblings had stopped fooling around, Gray smiled and greeted Zaloyan. Lord Marquis. At this moment, Marquis Sidney, who was wearing formal attire and exuding a dignified aura, walked into the banquet hall and stood in the center. Gray, Polly, and Zaloyan stopped talking. They knew that Marquis Sidney was about to announce the rewards for the various families. In fact, this banquet was a disguised reward conference. This time, we were able to eliminate the Shadow Serpent organization and eliminate this hidden danger that has been entangling the Sydney Hill for decades. It is all thanks to the efforts and contributions of everyone here and the 5 who will lie down forever. The Sydney family sees this and remembers it in our hearts. Looking around, Marquis Sidney's voice was gentle and forceful. In recognition of your bravery, the Sydney family has decided to give you a reward. Baron Quentin's family is awarded 3,000 gold coins. Baron Howell's family is awarded 3,200 gold coins. Earl Smalley's family is awarded 50,000 gold coins. Earl Ford's family is awarded 50,000 gold coins. Except for a few families, the families whose names were mentioned could not help but be overjoyed. A reward of at least 3,000 gold coins was already an extremely high reward for these baronial families. After all, under normal circumstances, a Viscount family's annual tax income was only about 10,000 gold coins. However, there were also some families that were suspicious because their names weren't on the list. However, their suspicions did not last long. After careful examination, we have decided to promote the Carlisle, Moore, and Evelyn's families from baronial families to Viscount families. Thank you, Marquis Sidney. The heads of the Carlisle and Moore families, as well as the Evelyn's family, who were related to the Fergus family by marriage, could not help but be pleasantly surprised. They were so excited that their bodies were trembling slightly. Just like the Fergus family wanted to be promoted to a Count family, these baronial families naturally also wanted to be promoted to a Viscount family. Although the competition was not as fierce as the competition for the title of Count, there was still a lot of smoke. To be able to stand out in the competition and be promoted to a Viscount family, one could imagine how excited they were. Marquis Sidney waited for the excitement to subside before continuing. In addition, we have decided to promote the Fergus Viscount family to a Count family. Since Grey Fergus currently has no experience in managing a territory, the title of Count will be temporarily replaced by Emerson Fergus. Thank you, Marquis Sidney. The Fergus family will definitely live up to the Sidney family's expectations. Viscount Fergus walked out slightly agitatedly, bowed, and said solemnly. Even though he already knew, he could not help but feel a surge of emotion when he heard it now. The efforts of generations, the long-cherished wish of generations, had finally been realized in his generation. After the award, the atmosphere in the banquet hall became even more lively. The people of the various families enthusiastically clinked their wine glasses, and the crisp clinking sound of wine glasses could be heard continuously. Congratulations, Viscount Fergus. No, it should be Earl Fergus now. Earl Ford walked up with a glass of red wine and clinked glasses with Earl Fergus with a smile. Thank you. Earl Fergus suppressed his excessive joy and responded with a smile. Soon, he was surrounded by many nobles who came to congratulate him. Even Grey was not spared. He was also surrounded by many nobles and forced to drink a lot of red wine. Fortunately, his current physique was already extremely strong, and he would not get drunk easily. As expected, they've been promoted to a Count's family. Earl Smalley glanced at Earl Fergus with a trace of coldness in his eyes. He had already guessed on the way back, and now his guess had been confirmed. With his relationship with the Fergus family, he naturally did not wish for the Fergus family to be promoted to a Count's family. Whether it was the Richens family or the Bessemer family, no matter which family was promoted to a Count's family, it would obviously be better for the Smalley family's interest than the Fergus family's. However, this matter clearly did not change according to his will. The Fergus family has really become a Count's family. The Richens family really has no hope at all. Viscount Lycan's eyes were filled with malice as he resisted the urge to distort his face. As the head of the 6 Viscount families and the family closest to becoming a Count, he could only watch helplessly as the Fergus family, which could only be ranked in the lower middle of the 6 Viscount families, rose above the rest and became a Count's family. One could only imagine the resentment, dissatisfaction, and jealousy in his heart. After exchanging a few pleasantries with the other families, he left, saying that he was unwell. He did not want to stay in this banquet hall for a moment longer. The Fergus family has already been promoted to a Count's family. The Bessemer family has no chance. Viscount Bessemer revealed a bitter smile. Although she was a woman, she had never believed that she would lose to a man. That was the truth. In terms of battle prowess, she was the leader of all the Viscount families. Even Viscount Lycans was inferior to her in terms of battle prowess. Moreover, her children were also extremely outstanding. Her eldest daughter, Jolie, was already a high-rank blood warrior. In a few years, she should be able to become a ferocious blood warrior. The possibility of her becoming a berserk warrior was very high. However, compared to Grey Fergus, she was far too lacking. He was a few years younger than Jolie, but he was already a berserk warrior. This speed of growth was simply too exaggerated. She could not help but feel slightly jealous. How could the Fergus family be so lucky to have such an outstanding child? Why did she not have such luck? Chapter 257. In a high-class room, an old man who was lying quietly on the bed suddenly opened his eyes, revealing a pair of extremely cold eyes. His eyes moved left and right, and the unfamiliar environment made him suddenly alert. He turned over and tried to sit up. A piercing pain came from his abdomen, causing him to cry out in pain. He lay back down on the bed, causing the elastic bed to creak as he fell. He gently lifted the quilt and looked down at his abdomen. There were many white bandages wrapped around his abdomen, and it seemed that because of his action just now, the wound under the bandages split open again. The color of the bandages turned crimson at a speed visible to the naked eye. He remembered that his abdomen was once penetrated by Manel Sidney's greatsword. The wound on his abdomen should have been left at that time. Manel Sidney. Thinking of Manel Sidney, his eyes were full of cold hatred. He clenched his few remaining teeth as if they would break at any time. After a moment, he suppressed the hatred in his heart and turned his attention to his current environment. This was a luxuriously decorated room. From the decorations in the room, this should be the bedroom of a noble family. Where am I? How is the organization? He endured the pain and gently moved his body to the side of the bed. He wanted to get out of bed and stand up. I advise you not to do this. Your injuries are too serious. Even a healing potion can only keep you alive. At this moment, with the sound of the door opening, a person walked in. Looking at Rob Tracy, who wanted to sit up, the person spoke with an old voice. "It's you, Ralph Wallen." Rob Tracy looked sideways at the person who spoke. It was an old man in a gray coat with a face full of wrinkles. He recognized this person because this person had discussed with him many times about merging the Shadow Serpent into the Wallen family, but he refused. With such serious injuries, even the healing potion didn't have much effect. You were in a coma for 7 days. I thought you had no hope. I didn't expect you to wake up. It seems that your luck is not bad. Looking at Rob Tracy, Ralph Wallen sighed slightly. 7 days? I was unconscious for 7 days? Rob Tracy frowned and asked in a deep voice after a slight hesitation. How is the Shadow Serpent now? I think you should already be very clear. Ralph Wallen shook his head slightly. Other than you, everyone else, including the 2 captain-level assassins, was killed. The Sidney family and the Fergus family. Rob Tracy's aged fists were clenched tightly, and his eyes were ice-cold. Even though he had already expected this, he still couldn't help but be greatly shocked when he heard this answer. The Shadow Serpent was his life's work. He had poured his life's work into the Shadow Serpent organization. Now his life's work was gone. He endured the pain in his abdomen and tried to get out of bed. I know you want to take revenge, but I advise you to recuperate first. Not to mention the Sidney family. Any family with a ferocious blood warrior would be enough to take your life. Ralph Wallen shook his head. The Sidney family is also the enemy of our Wallen family. Our Wallen family's hatred for the Sidney family is no weaker than yours. After being entangled with the Sidney family for hundreds of years, the 2 families had already forgotten their initial hatred. What was left behind was an unforgettable hatred. Many members of the Wallen family had died under the assassination and schemes of the Sidney family. Similarly, many members of the Sidney family had also died under the assassination and schemes of the Wallen family. Even the previous patriarchs of the 2 families had died because of this. Bringing up the past, I once again invite you to join the Wallen family. I think you should understand that if you want to take revenge on the Sidney family, your strength alone is far from enough. Gray and Earl Fergus stayed in Sidney Castle for a full 3 days to complete the paperwork for the promotion to a Count family, the letter of appointment, and other trivial matters. Only then did they leave Sidney Castle. The Fergus family's promotion from a Viscount family to a Count family naturally greatly increased the size of their territory. The original 3,000 square kilometers had expanded by 10 times, reaching a full 30,000 square kilometers. This area was already equivalent to the area of several cities and jurisdictions in Gray's previous world. The territory had expanded on the basis of the original territory of the Fergus family. It had expanded in all four directions, forming an irregular gear shape. Among them, the territories that originally belonged to the Rock family and the Oliver family had also been incorporated into the Fergus family's territory. These few days, Earl Fergus had been busy with matters related to the promotion to a Count family, while Grey had been flipping through the Sidney family's library. It could be said that he had gained a lot. I didn't expect the blood of a high-grade blood beast to have the ability to trigger mutations. If a blood vessel was implanted in the training of blood techniques, it was very likely to cause the body to collapse and directly cause the person to go insane. However, if one didn't implant a blood vessel, but simply absorbed the blood or blood essence of a high-grade blood beast through natural absorption, it could increase the speed of one's strength. Moreover, when the blood of a high-grade blood beast was of the same attribute as the blood technique one practiced, the faster the speed of one's strength increase, the better the effect. It was precisely because he knew this that Grey had used the blood of a high-grade blood beast as a cover when Zaloyang had mentioned the speed of his strength increase. However, he hadn't expected the blood of a high-grade blood beast to have the ability to trigger mutations. It seems that the Sidney family thought that the mutation of my blood fiend ability was due to consuming the blood of a high-grade blood beast. At first, Grey had been wondering why the Sidney family didn't seem to find the matter of his bloodline mutation strange. They didn't even ask him about it. Now, he understood that consuming the blood of a high-grade blood beast could trigger a bloodline mutation. Previously, when Grey had mentioned that he had consumed the blood of a high-grade blood beast to conceal the reason for his rapid increase in strength, the Sidney family had obviously thought that he had undergone a mutation after consuming the blood of a high-grade blood beast. Therefore, they didn't suspect much about this matter. However, consuming the blood of a high-grade blood beast can trigger a mutation. This is quite similar to my body's metamorphosis. All this time, Grey had been investigating the origin of his body's metamorphosis after consuming the blood of a high-grade blood beast. He wanted to know exactly what had caused this metamorphosis. Now, Grey saw a similarity in the phenomenon of consuming the blood of a high-grade blood beast. Of course, the phenomenon of Grey's metamorphosis after consuming the blood of a high-grade blood beast was different from the phenomenon of consuming the blood of a high-grade blood beast. Even consuming the blood of a blood beast of the same level could trigger a mutation. Moreover, it wasn't like the phenomenon of consuming the blood of a high-grade blood beast, which only had a small probability of occurring. Not only that, but after consuming the blood of a high-grade blood beast, the body would undergo a long period of second metamorphosis. In this state of metamorphosis, one's appetite would increase, and the corresponding speed of increase in strength would become extremely terrifying. It was very obvious that the phenomenon of Grey's metamorphosis after consuming the blood of a high-grade blood beast was more significant than the phenomenon of an ordinary person consuming the blood of a high-grade blood beast. It was simply an evolved version of this phenomenon. It was as if this phenomenon of mutation had been upgraded and evolved in Grey's body. 2 days later, Grey and Earl Fergus returned to Fergus Castle with the remaining copper rhinoceros. In front of the castle gate, the Fergus family members came to welcome Grey and Earl Fergus after learning that they had returned. "Father Grey, you're finally back. You've been gone for more than 20 days, and there's been no news." Bernal sighed in relief when he saw that Grey and Earl Fergus didn't show any signs of injury. The others in the castle didn't know why Grey and Earl Fergus had been recruited by the Sidney family this time, but he knew and understood the danger of this time very well. Although he didn't know the full strength of the Shadow Serpent organization, he could tell that this organization wasn't simple from the fact that they hadn't been destroyed despite being enemies with the Sidney family more than 20 years ago, and that there were several Berserk blood warriors in the organization. He even faintly guessed that there should be Berserk blood warriors in this organization. Grey and Earl Fergus had left for more than 20 days without any news, so he couldn't help but feel uneasy. Fortunately, Grey and Earl Fergus had returned safely. Thump, thump, thump. After entering the castle, Grey commanded the bronze-armored rhinoceros to head to the basement. Seeing the numerous injuries on the rhinoceros body, their expressions changed slightly. "The bronze-armored rhinoceros is injured," Sarah and Bernice were astonished. The bronze-armored rhinoceros has such a strong defense, but it actually suffered such serious injuries, Caroline frowned. The bronze-armored rhinoceros actually suffered such serious injuries. Bernal's pupils shrank slightly. Just from injuries on the bronze-armored rhinoceros body, he could feel the desperation of this battle. Master, what about the other 3 berserk blood fiends? Madame de Milan keenly noticed something that they had overlooked. They're all damaged. Earl Fergus shook his head. All damaged? The expressions of the Fergus family members changed. Although most of them hadn't heard from Viscount Fergus about the purpose of this trip, they had vaguely guessed. After all, this was the first time they had brought 4 blood fiends with them. Now, of the 4 blood fiends, 3 were damaged, and 1 was full of injuries. One could imagine what kind of battle had taken place. It's good that they're fine. The few of them comforted him. Although it was a pity to lose the Windrider leopard and the jade lizard, which could fully display the strength of a berserk beast, the most important thing was that they were fine. Hearing their words of comfort, Count Fergus smiled and said, "Don't worry. Don't worry, we didn't lose out this time." Chapter 258. Not a loss. The few of them were puzzled. Losing 3 berserk-level blood fiends, and even after replenishing them, their combat strength was not as strong as before. It was not a small loss. Even if the Sidney family compensated them with tens of thousands of gold coins, it was still not worth it. Who would have thought that under such circumstances, Earl Fergus would actually say that this trip was not a loss? Indeed, it was not a loss. Seeing that Earl Fergus was in a good mood and did not intend to say it out loud, Gray smiled and replied, "Father Gray, what reward did the Sidney family give us?" Looking at the old man and the young man who were keeping everyone in suspense, Bernal did not know whether to laugh or cry. One of them was almost 50 years old, while the other was almost 20 years old, yet they were speaking mysteriously like children. Seeing Bernal's serious inquiry, Earl Fergus's face turned serious. He was acting like this because he was in a good mood. Usually, his character was very calm. His face turned serious as he said seriously, "Although we lost 3 berserk-level blood fiends this time, it was not a loss because the Fergus family has been promoted to an Earl family by the Sidney family." What? Bernal almost thought that he had heard wrongly. Is this true? Madame de Milan lightly covered her red lips to hide the surprised expression on her face that did not look like a noble lady's. The Fergus family has been promoted to an Earl family? Caroline's eyes widened. She was also shocked by this news. Elise was so surprised that her mouth opened and forgot to close it. "Brother, is this true?" Sarah quickly ran forward and shook Gray's arm as she asked. "It's true." Gray nodded affirmatively. "The Fergus family has been promoted to an Earl family." That's great." Hearing Gray's affirmation, Sarah's face was full of surprise. While receiving aristocratic etiquette, she would also receive aristocratic knowledge. She was very clear about the huge difference in territory and income between a Viscount family and an Earl family. She was also very clear about the benefits of the Fergus family being promoted to an Earl family. Of course, at this moment, she was thinking about the fact that her monthly allowance would definitely be higher than now. The Fergus family has been promoted to an Earl family. The Fergus family has been promoted to an Earl family. The servants who accompanied the Fergus family were also surprised. After all, the status of the servants of a Viscount family was different from that of an Earl family. It took a while for everyone to recover from their shock. "Sir, this is great." Mrs. Milan's face was still full of surprise. At this moment, she couldn't care less about her noble temperament. The long-cherished wish of several generations of the Fergus family has finally been realized in your generation. Hearing this, Viscount Fergus had a gratified smile on his face. "It's all thanks to Gray that we could be promoted to an Earl family this time. It's also because of Gray that the Sidney family promoted the Fergus family to an Earl family. It's all thanks to Gray." Everyone was puzzled. Yes, Gray is now Berserker. It's because of this that the Sidney family promoted the Fergus family to an Earl family. I'm only the temporary head of the family. Apart from Bernal, who already knew, everyone couldn't help but be pleasantly surprised. "Sir, The Fergus family has been promoted to an earl family. We must hold a banquet to celebrate." Madame de Milan suppressed her expression with great difficulty and said with a smile, "Indeed, we should hold a banquet to celebrate. In addition, everyone in the castle, including the servants, have their monthly allowance increased by 1 month. No, 2 months." Earl Fergus ordered. "I will." Madame de Milan smiled. Compared to the Fergus family's promotion to an earl family, this expenditure was naturally nothing. After chatting with everyone for a while, Gray came out of the living room and went to the castle hall. In front of him, a young woman came to greet Gray. Behind her, there was a young girl in maid attire. The young woman had fair skin and a slender and graceful figure. Her brown hair was coiled up, revealing her delicate face. Different from ordinary servants, she wore an exquisite winter dress, which set off her wonderful figure even more wonderful. "Young Master Gray." The young woman walked in front of Gray and seemed to have thought of something. Her face turned slightly red as she greeted Gray. She was Barbara, who once had a night of intimacy with Gray. His gaze fell on the other party. Gray's eyes became a bit heated. Thinking of that night of intimacy, his heart couldn't help but burn. But considering that it was only afternoon, Gray could only helplessly suppress the heat in his heart and smile. "Very beautiful. This outfit suits you very well." Hearing Gray's praise, Barbara couldn't help but be delighted, and a sweet smile appeared on her face. Wearing this custom-made set of clothes that cost her a year's worth of commission, she was quite nervous. On the one hand, it was because this set of clothes was too expensive. On the other hand, she was afraid that Gray wouldn't like this kind of outfit. Seeing that Gray didn't dislike it, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. "How have you been recently?" Gray asked with a smile. "Nothing at all. In fact, I'm not used to it." Bobla was a little depressed. In the past, when she was still a maid of the castle, she didn't have much to do, but she did have things to do, so she didn't feel too free. Now that she suddenly had nothing to do, she suddenly felt a bit bored and didn't know what to do. "It's fine. You'll get used to it slowly. If you're really bored, you could go to the city for a stroll." Gray comforted. He had already given the order, so the head maid naturally didn't dare to arrange work for Barbara. With his current power in the castle, not to mention the head maid, even Madame de Milan wouldn't dare to forcefully arrange work for Barbara and cause trouble for her. "Right. Who else is in your family?" Gray suddenly remembered that he had occupied this body for more than 3 years since he came to this world, and Barbara had also been his maid for more than 3 years. He still didn't know the situation of her family. "Other than my parents, there's an older brother," Barbara replied. "Do they live in Fergus City?" According to Gray's knowledge, except for families that have been maids for generations, the Fergus family usually chose maids from Fergus City. Therefore, the families of these maids usually lived in Fergus City. The work in the castle, the commission, and the treatment were all very good. Many families in the city were willing to send their daughters to the castle. Moreover, because if the owner of the castle took a fancy to them, their status and even their family status would change drastically, and they would receive great benefits. Even some families with small assets would send their daughters to the castle. "Yes," Barbara nodded. "They rented a shop in the city and are doing a small business. I'll accompany you to take a look tomorrow." Gray thought for a moment and said. Since Barbara was following him, he naturally wouldn't mistreat Barbara, her parents, and her older brother. He didn't know the exact situation of Barbara's family, so he hadn't thought of how to settle them down yet. Whether to find a better shop for them or arrange for them to be shopkeepers in a shop directly under the Fergus family, he still had to see the specific situation of their family and their own thoughts before making a decision. Yes, understanding Gray's meaning, Barbara's face suddenly flushed slightly red. She lowered her head and softly responded. After staying with Barbara for a while, Gray went to the basement and used the rune space bag to carry the bronze-armored rhinoceros. He left the castle and came to a forest near the castle. It was already winter, and the forest was full of white snow. Heavy snow continued to fall from the sky, and many trees had already lost their originally green leaves because they were deciduous trees. Bang! Gray released the bronze-armored rhinoceros. The moment its huge body landed on the ground, it made quite a bit of noise. I wonder if the reverse nurturing ability is still effective on these trees that have already lost their leaves. Gray raised his eyebrows and used the reverse nurturing ability. With him as the center, an invisible wave spread out. The next moment, the trees that were originally covered in snow began to emit a faint green light that drifted over. All the green light gathered on the bronze-armored rhinoceros's body. The bronze body of the bronze-armored rhinoceros was enveloped by the green light. One could vaguely see that the numerous, uneven injuries on the bronze-armored rhinoceros's body were rapidly recovering. Soon, the bronze-armored rhinoceros had recovered to its original state, and there was not a trace of injury on its body. Good. Seeing that the bronze-armored rhinoceros's injuries had recovered, Gray heaved a sigh of relief and stored the bronze-armored rhinoceros in a rune space bag. When I have time, I have to make up for the lost mad-level blood fiends. Compared to one Cercopithecus, for mad-level blood fiends were more suitable for the daily defense of the castle. After all, the castle was too large. If there was only one blood fiend, it would be impossible to cope with it. It would be easy to make mistakes, so the lost mad-level blood fiends had to be replenished as soon as possible. Thinking of the lost mad-level blood fiends, Gray thought of Rob Tracy, who was rescued by the Wallen family. The leader of the Shadow Serpent's face suddenly darkened. I wonder if Rob Tracy is still alive. With Rob Tracy's hatred for the Sydney Hill, if he was not dead and his body recovered, he would definitely seek revenge on the Sydney Hill. Moreover, the Fergus family was likely to be the focus of his attention. After all, the Fergus family had first killed many of their subordinates, including a berserker. Then, in the process of encircling and suppressing the Shadow Serpent, they had stopped the enemy from besieging Mantle Sydney. To a certain extent, they had affected the battle situation. Rob Tracy's hatred for the Fergus family was imaginable. I don't know if Rob Tracy is still alive. The most important thing now is to increase my strength as soon as possible. It's better to be safe than sorry. For the current Gray, the fastest and most likely way to increase his strength was to consume the blood of a special wind-type blood fiend to strengthen the wind attribute of the Gale Wolf's blood fiend ability. According to his estimation, through this method, it was even possible for his strength to reach the level of a berserker when he was still a berserker. Right now, I only have the blood of a blade weasel, a berserker special blood fiend. It would be best if I could get the blood of a berserker special wind-type blood fiend. It was a pity to consume the blood of a blade weasel. In order to maximize the ability of each transformation, it would be best to consume blood of a higher level than the current one. During this time, he had also tried to find the blood of a berserker special wind-type blood fiend, but he had not found anything. Now, there was only 1 month left before the scheduled time for the next consumption. Time was running out. Chapter 259. Where can I get at least the blood of a barbarian-level wind-type special blood fiend? Gray furrowed his brows. When he was in Sydney Castle, he had asked Saroyan if the Sydney family had any suitable wind-type special blood fiend's blood, but the answer he got was no. The Sydney family did have the blood of a barbarian-level wind-type special blood fiend, but it was obviously useless for Gray. The Sydney family only had the ability to hunt a barbarian-level wind-type special blood fiend, the copperback dragon. As the Sydney family's foundation, the Sydney family naturally would not use the copperback dragon. As for the others, although Marquis Sydney and Marnell Sydney practiced special blood techniques, they did not have absolute confidence in hunting a barbarian-level special blood fiend unless they worked together. But with their status, especially Marquis Sydney, who was the head of the Marquis family, it was obviously impossible for them to spend a lot of time in the depths of the forest just to hunt blood fiends. Besides, they might encounter danger. After all, there were not only barbarian-level blood fiends in the depths of the forest, but also barbarian-level blood fiends. If they were unlucky, it was not impossible for them to encounter a king-level blood fiend. Not to mention the blood of a barbarian-level special blood fiend. Even the blood of an ordinary barbarian-level blood fiend would be hard to come by. A barbarian blood warrior could become the backbone of the great aristocratic family, the Marquis family, which was second only to a duke's family. It was conceivable that there were not many barbarian blood warriors at this level. Even if one searched the entire Purple Moon Kingdom, there would not be many barbarian blood warriors. Therefore, there were definitely not many forces that had the ability to hunt barbarian-level blood fiends. Blood of this level was definitely very rare. Because of this, the blood and blood essence of a barbarian level or above blood fiend would be sold at a very high price, even if it was not a barbarian level blood fiend. For example, when Gray bid for the blood essence of the Gale Wolf last time, he spent a total of 1 million gold coins to buy it. 1 million gold coins was truly a large number. When the Fergus family was still a viscount, their annual tax income was only 10,000 gold coins. Even if they didn't have any expenses, it would still take 110 years of accumulation. In fact, a noble family's expenses were extremely high in all aspects. It was already considered good if they could keep half of the 10,000 gold coins. I'm afraid that only the 3 duke families and the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom have the possibility of possessing the blood of a barbarian wind-type blood fiend. The 3 duke families and the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom all had desolate blood warriors in their ranks, and the royal family had never stopped producing king-class warriors. Based on their abilities, it was obvious that they were capable of hunting down special barbaric-level blood fiends. However, it was obviously impossible for Gray to have anything to do with such an existence. Right now, the highest-ranking person that he had come into contact with was only Marquis Sidney. Maybe Sophia, no forget it. Thinking of the Duke family, Gray couldn't help but think of the mysterious Sophia. Since she was able to produce a desolate-level blood technique, it was highly possible that she came from the Duke family. He might be able to obtain the blood of a barbarian wind-type blood fiend from her. However, after thinking about it, Gray gave up on the idea. It wasn't that he couldn't bring himself to do it, but that he didn't know how to contact her. He had met her a total of 3 times. The first 2 times were by chance, and the 3rd time was when she took the initiative to contact him. He didn't even know how to contact her. Moreover, Gray was slightly wary of this person. This person was too mysterious, and he couldn't see through her. It was too much of a coincidence for them to meet in the ruins. In his opinion, it was too much of a coincidence. Furthermore, the invitation to explore the ruins last time was also filled with strangeness when he thought about it. Logically speaking, with her status, if she wanted to find someone to explore the ruins with, there should be no problem even if she wanted to find a barbarian blood warrior. However, she just had to find him a descendant of the Viscount family, and even used a desolate-level blood technique as bait. He really couldn't figure out what she was planning. Was it a prank? She was two-faced and liked to tease others. She was used to meeting the children of great aristocratic families, and found him, who came from a small aristocratic family, interesting. So, she wanted to tease him? Or maybe she already knew his secret. Perhaps through their previous contact, she sensed that he had a secret, so she wanted to uncover and investigate it? In short, this person was very mysterious, and her motives were unclear. If possible, Gray wanted to avoid interacting with her as much as possible. I can only go to Mercenary City to try my luck. After thinking about it, Gray felt that the most likely place to obtain the blood of a barbarian-level special wind-type blood fiend was Mercenary City. Mercenary City was a city formed by mercenaries. It was located beside the Purple Moon Forest, the largest forest in the Purple Moon Kingdom. The Red Wings encampment that Gray had met before was located here. This city was formed hundreds of years ago, but it was called Mercenary City 50 years ago. 50 years ago, a king-level fighter who didn't belong to the Purple Moon Kingdom's royal family or the 3 great duke families was born. He came from the Lex family, which made a living by completing mercenary missions for generations. His name was Zandibo Lex, and he was known as the King of Mercenaries. In order to show their respect to this king-level fighter, the Purple Moon Kingdom's royal family gifted the original mercenary city to the Lex family, promising that the family would operate it for generations to come. They became the only family that didn't belong to a noble family, but had a fief. A mercenary city that didn't belong to a noble family, but had a king-level fighter as a backer naturally attracted a large number of mercenary regiments. There were even mercenary regiments led by barbarian blood warriors. With so many powerful mercenary regiments gathered, Gray felt that it was possible to obtain the blood of a barbarian-level special wind-type blood fiend. I'm not in a hurry to replenish the mad-level blood fiends. The most important thing now is to find the blood of a barbarian-level special wind-type blood fiend. Looks like I have to make a trip to Mercenary City as soon as possible. Currently, the Fergus family's biggest enemy was Rob Tracy, who might still be alive. As for the others, such as the Smalley family, Gray didn't care about them. If he wanted to, Gray was even confident that he could destroy this family. After all, his own abilities were close to the barbarian level, and he also had Cercopithecus, who was half a step away from the barbarian level. Even if the other party had some trump cards, it would be difficult for them to fight against the strongest combination below the barbarian level. However, Gray didn't intend to do so. The Smalley family was an earl's family. If they were destroyed, the impact would be too great. The Sidney family would definitely be furious and investigate thoroughly. With the combat power displayed by the Fergus family and the enmity between the Fergus family and the Smalley family, it was inevitable that the Fergus family would be suspected. It wasn't worth it to create a grudge against the Sidney family for the sake of the Smalley family, which was no longer important. The only person who could be considered an enemy of the Fergus family now was Rob Tracy. With Rob Tracy as an imaginary enemy, even if they gathered for more berserk-level blood fiends, they would still be no match for him. Not to mention gathering 4 berserk-level blood fiends. Even if Gray and Cercopithecus joined forces, they would still be no match for him. The most troublesome thing was that the other party had a magical weapon that could control the barbarian-level blood fiends. The only fortunate thing was that according to Marnell Sidney, even if the other party could survive, it would take a long time for him to recover from his injuries. This gave Gray time. Gray's current plan was to find the blood of a special barbarian-level wind-type blood fiend. After swallowing it, his combat power would surpass the berserk level and reach the barbarian level. After that, he would hunt down a barbarian-level blood fiend and increase the power of his ability to control corpses to the barbarian level. In this way, even if Rob Tracy attacked, he would still be able to resist. In the evening, Gray pushed open the door and walked into the bedroom. The light from the oil lamp illuminated the bedroom. The smell of high-end incense oil filled the bedroom with a delicate fragrance. On the bed, under the goose-feather quilt, a graceful figure could be vaguely seen. Hearing Gray's footsteps, the figure on the bed lifted the goose-feather quilt and walked over to welcome him. Her slender and delicate body was wearing a thin, translucent silk dress. Her snow-white, curvaceous body could be faintly seen. Young Master Gray. Barbara's face was slightly flushed as she walked up to Gray and took off his coat. Her soft hands caressed Gray's body. The fire that Gray had suppressed in the afternoon suddenly surged, and his whole body was boiling hot. He reached out his hand, pulled the delicate body into his arms, and rolled onto the warm bed. Outside the castle, snow continued to fall. On the bed, 2 fiery bodies were entwined together. It was only after a long time that they stopped. The next day, Gray, who had finished his morning training, took Barbara, who was wearing a beautiful blue fur coat, and left the castle in a castle carriage. Although it was winter, it wasn't too cold in the carriage. After winter, the Fergus family's carriage was inlaid with a thick layer of cotton blankets. It surrounded the entire interior of the carriage, effectively isolating the cold from invading. The carriage drove into Fergus City and traveled for over 20 minutes on the streets of Fergus City. After turning several streets, it finally stopped. Knock, knock, knock. Outside the carriage, the servant driving the carriage lightly knocked on the door and said respectfully, "Young Master Gray, we've arrived." Gray nodded indifferently. He opened the door and helped Barbara down from the carriage. "Which shop is it?" Gray looked at Barbara and asked. "It's that shop over there." Barbara pointed at a grocery shop on the street far away. His gaze followed Barbara's finger. In the next moment, Gray raised an imperceptible eyebrow. With his current strength as a berserker, his eyesight was naturally excellent. Even from so far away, he could roughly see the situation of the shop that Barbara had pointed at. It was as if a violent gale had passed through. The shelves that held the goods were crooked, and all kinds of goods were piled up on the ground messily. Some were even stained with snow, and it looked like they couldn't be bought anymore. Chapter 260. In the grocery store, a woman's face was full of uneasiness as she looked at the middle-aged man beside her. What should we do? The middle-aged man was not too old, only in his 40s, but his forehead was already full of wrinkles, and even his hair had turned white. Hearing the woman's question, the wrinkles on his forehead frowned, and he sighed. That's a noble. It's useless to find anyone. If they were caught by the city guards for ordinary matters, they could give them some money to make an exception. However, it was absolutely impossible to offend a noble. Even if they gave them money, the city guards would not dare to accept it. We can't just watch Blue get beaten to death like this, right? The woman was so anxious that she was about to cry. Suddenly, it was as if she had grabbed onto the last life-saving straw. Isn't Barbara young Master Gray's personal maid? Why don't we get her to beg young Master Gray to save Blue? It's useless. The middle-aged man shook his head without any hope. Although Barbara works in the castle, she's only a maid. Young Master Gray won't stand up for us for her, especially when the other party is a noble. Then what should we do? What should we do? The woman finally could not hold back her tears. Looking at the crying woman, the middle-aged man's face was dejected, and a deep sense of helplessness surfaced in his heart. There had never been a moment when he hated his own incompetence so much. Dad, Mom, what's going on? As they approached the store, Barbara finally noticed the abnormality in the store. She jogged all the way to the front of the store. Seeing the crying woman in the store, the dejected middle-aged man could not help but ask anxiously and worriedly, "Barbara, why are you back?" Hearing Barbara's voice, the middle-aged man and woman looked up in surprise. When they saw Barbara's clothes, they could not help but ask in shock, "You or your clothes?" Although it was a small store, they had stayed in Fergus City for a long time and naturally had good eyesight. They could tell at a glance that Barbara's clothes were not cheap. "Dad, Mom, I'll explain to you later. Why is the store so messy? Where's my brother?" Barbara shook her head and asked anxiously, "Your brother was taken away by the city guards." The woman's voice choked with sobs. "What?" Babla's expression instantly turned into one of panic. To ordinary people, the city guard camp was not a good place. Many people did not come out after entering. It was at this moment that Gray walked up to him. Seeing Gray, the woman and the middle-aged man were shocked. Even the clothes of the nobleman just now were much worse than this noble young master in front of them. However, the two of them didn't recognize Gray because they rarely came to Fergus City. Although Gray had a great reputation in Fergus City, very few people had actually seen him. "Don't worry, I'm here." Gray walked up and patted Babla's shoulder in consolation. With his hearing ability, he naturally heard every word of the conversation just now. "Barbara, this young master is?" The middle-aged man looked at Gray in shock. Seeing Gray's hand patting his daughter's shoulder intimately and his daughter not resisting, he immediately understood that the relationship between Gray and his daughter was not ordinary. He couldn't help but be delighted. Although he didn't know who this young master was, his identity was definitely not simple. If he was willing, he might be able to save Blue. "This is young Master Gray." Babla introduced with a slightly red face after being patted by Gray's hand on her shoulder and being seen by her parents. "Young Master Gray?" "It's young Master Gray." The middle-aged man and woman were stunned at first. Then they were suddenly ecstatic. In the entire Fergus territory, there was only one person who would be called young Master Gray. That was Viscount Fergus's son, Gray Fergus. It was said that this young Master Gray was the most favored among the Viscount's sons. He didn't expect his daughter to be favored by this person. This time, Blue could be saved. "Young Master Gray, please save Babla's brother." The woman was already begging anxiously. "Don't worry, nothing will happen." Was he captured by the city guards? "Get on the carriage first, and tell me what happened on the way." The carriage carrying the four of them headed toward the city guards' camp. In the carriage, Gray asked Babla's parents about the general situation. Due to the slippery snow, a noble's carriage slid to the side of the road and knocked over the goods rack set up by Babla's parents. The goods were scattered all over the ground. However, The noble young master in the carriage thought that the shop was blocking the road, so he got someone to smash the shop. For a small shop, such a loss was too great. Babala's brother was furious and went forward to reason, but he was captured by the city guards under the noble young master's orders. The city guards' camp was a group of buildings not far from the city walls of Fergus City. There were 500 soldiers stationed there, and they were responsible for the safety of Fergus City. The carriage stopped in front of the city guards' camp. Before Gray and the others could walk down, a man with a mustache on his face and more than 10 people had already respectfully welcomed them. He was the commander of the city guards. The carriage had not yet approached and was still far away. But a soldier had already noticed the Fergus family symbol on the carriage and hurriedly ran to report to him. After hearing the report, he hurriedly led his team leaders to the camp to welcome them. When he saw the young man wearing a precious fur coat walk down from the carriage, his eyes suddenly trembled and he spoke even more respectfully. "Greetings to young Master Gray." As the commander of the city guards, although he did not have a noble title, he was still considered half a noble. He had once attended a banquet hosted by a noble, and he was fortunate enough to meet this young master at the banquet. Who had the most power in the Fergus territory today? That was naturally the owner of the Fergus territory, Viscount Fergus. Who was second? Without a doubt, it was this person in front of him. He was already a ferocious blood warrior at such a young age, and was highly valued by Viscount Fergus. Moreover, there were rumors that this person was already a ferocious blood warrior, and because of him, the Fergus family had now been promoted to a Count family. Of course, he was skeptical about this news. This young master in front of him was truly too young. Even so, this young master's position in the Fergus territory was absolutely unquestionable. Facing the dozen or so people waiting respectfully, including the commander of the city guards, Gray did not respond. He allowed them to stand stiffly on the spot and turned to help Barbara down from the carriage. Thump. Seeing Gray's attitude, the commander of the city guards and the dozen or so people following behind him felt their hearts skip a beat. A bad premonition arose in their hearts. As expected, after helping Barbara down from the carriage, Gray turned his head. His face was cold, and his gaze was cold as he looked at the dozen or so people and asked, "Where are the people you've captured?" "The people we've captured." The commander of the city guards was suspicious. He hadn't received any reports of someone being captured today. However, he quickly understood the reason. He immediately turned his head and looked at the dozen or so captains behind him with an unfriendly gaze. Who captured them? As city guards, they would occasionally handle some private matters. Sometimes it was for nobles, and sometimes it was for wealthy merchants. Although he knew about such matters, he would usually turn a blind eye. After all, regardless of whether it was a noble or a wealthy merchant, one with power and the other with money, it wasn't good to provoke them. Evidently, someone had done such a thing today. Unfortunately, the person who had been captured seemed to be related to young Master Gray, and this had thoroughly angered him. "Don't drag me along if you want to die." He even had the thought of cutting the person who had done this alive. "If you want to do something, I won't stop you, but you should at least find out about the other party's background before taking action, right?" Now, this hole had been poked all the way to the second most powerful person in the Fergus territory, young Master Gray. Wasn't this courting death? And he even wanted to bring him, the commander of the city guards, along with him. I captured, it was young Master Shix who ordered me to capture them." Among the dozen or so captains, a man with small eyes and a pointy chin said with a trembling voice. He had already asked around before the capture and found that the shop owner didn't have any background. That was why he dared to capture them. But what was going on now? Not only did they have a background, it was also extraordinarily powerful. His heart sank to the bottom of the valley. "Where is he?" Gray looked at the captain and asked coldly. In the prison. Under Gray's gaze, the small-eyed, sharp-chinned city guard captain's body trembled violently, and he almost couldn't stand properly. "Lead the way." Gray couldn't be bothered with him for now and had someone lead the way to the prison. Within the prison, a young man in thin clothes was tied to a cross. His entire body was covered in bloody scars. Beside him was a noble youth wearing a fox fur coat. He held a horsewhip in his hand and looked at the man with contempt. So what if I tore down your shop? Who told you to be stubborn? Who told you to talk back to me? Whack, whack, whack. He whipped out the horse whip again and again, ruthlessly striking the young man's body. The skin on the young man's body suddenly split open, and streaks of blood appeared, reflecting his thin clothes red. The young noble's horsewhip was already covered in blood, but he didn't care at all. He whipped it on the ground, and after it was covered in a layer of dust, he continued whipping the young man. Suddenly, young master, no. All right, young Master Gray is here. Following the sound of hurried footsteps, a man dressed like a servant rushed in and shouted anxiously. Why is he here? The noble youth asked curiously. I heard it in the camp. He seems to be related to young Master Gray. The servant said anxiously. How could it be? Didn't you say he? The noble youth's expression suddenly changed. This person was related to young Master Gray? How could this be? Chapter 261. Tap, tap, tap. The dense sound of footsteps approached from afar. The noble youth stiffly turned his head and saw Gray walking over with a group of people escorting him, his face ashen. His face instantly turned pale, as if he had lost all color. His voice trembled as he spoke. Gray, young master. The commander of the city guards did not know the truth of the rumor, but as a descendant of a noble family, how could he not know? Although it was hard to believe, it was the truth. The young Master Gray in front of him was not even 20 years old, but he was already a berserker. They were favored by the Sydney Marquis family. For this reason, the Sydney Marquis family made an exception and promoted the Fergus family to a Count family. It could be said that the person that Fergus couldn't afford to provoke the most wasn't Earl Fergus, but young Master Gray in front of him. When his father, Lord Elliot, heard the news, he gathered the siblings yesterday and specifically warned them not to provoke the young master in front of them. However, he did not expect that he would still provoke them. His heart suddenly sank to the bottom of the valley. On the cross, a young man's hands were tied to it. His entire body was covered in bloody scars. Big brother. When they arrived, Gray and the others immediately saw the young man who was tied to the cross and covered in blood. Upon seeing this young man, Babala ran over with tears in her eyes. The middle-aged man and woman also stepped forward with anxious expressions. Babala, Dad, Mom, why are you here? Did that bastard capture you too? Seeing Barbara, the middle-aged man and woman appear, Blue thought they had been captured by the noble youth and glared at him with fire in his eyes. Bastard, come at me if you have any problems. I'm the one who provoked you. My dad, my mom, and my sister didn't provoke you. No, he didn't capture us. It was young Master Gray. It was young Master Gray who brought us here to save you. Barbara shook her head and said, Young Master Gray? Did young Master Gray bring you here to save me? Blue's eyes were filled with surprise and astonishment. He was pleasantly surprised that the high and mighty young Master Gray of Fergus Castle had specially come to save him. He was astonished that someone had actually stood up for him. Although his sister was now young Master Gray's personal maid, he didn't believe that a maid could persuade her master to stand up for her family. Therefore, from the very beginning, he had already lost all hope. At this moment, a few clever city guard captains had already stepped forward and helped to put Blue down from cross. Gray went forward to check. After making sure the wounds weren't fatal, he turned to the culprit, the noble youth. How dare you act so recklessly in Fergus City? Do you still have any respect for the Fergus family? Gray had seen the noble youth before him a few times before at noble banquets, but he wasn't familiar with him. Given his status, he was surrounded by the elites of the various houses. The Shixing youth who was venting his anger on a peasant obviously wasn't at the level of an elite. He didn't even have the right to speak to him. Young Master Gray, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't know he was your... When he saw Barbara, who had followed Gray, and heard Barbara call the young man Blue, elder brother, he already understood what was going on. The coat that Barbara was wearing was obviously not something that a peddler's family could afford. In that case, Barbara's identity was self-evident. He couldn't help but feel bitter. He couldn't help but complain to Blue that he should have said so earlier if they were related. In other words, it's fine if we're not related. Gray humphed coldly. He had heard about the ways of the noble youths. It would have been fine if he hadn't encountered them, but now that he did, he had to teach them a lesson. He didn't want Fergus City to be ruined because of these mischievous nobles. No, no, young Master Grey, that's not what I meant. Hearing the anger in Grey's voice, the noble youth broke out in cold sweat. Then what do you mean? Grey asked as he looked at the Shixen youth. Young Master Grey, I know I was wrong. Shixen's legs gave out under Grey's cold gaze, and he knelt on the ground. Is this the arrogant noble youth from before? Blue, who had been rescued from the cross and put on his coat again, was currently grimacing in pain. He could not help but be surprised when he saw the noble youth who had been arrogant and constantly whipping him kneel on the ground in fear in front of Grey. Although he had long heard that this young Master Grey was extremely influential in Fergus Hill, he didn't expect his influence to be so great that he could actually frighten a noble youth into kneeling on the ground, not even daring to breathe loudly. Babla, how did you manage to get Master Grey to your clothes for me? He looked at Barbara and saw that she was wearing an extremely expensive fur coat. He had only seen such clothes on noble ladies before. Could it be? Thinking back to how Grey stood up for him, he immediately understood the reason. Yes. Barbara nodded almost imperceptibly, her face blushing slightly. That's great. Blue was overjoyed to hear Barbara's affirmation. He wasn't the kind of person who would sell his sister to get into the good graces of nobles. The reason he was happy was because he knew that Barbara would be able to live a luxurious life without having to worry about food or clothing. Being able to see his family break free of their status as peasants and live such a life was naturally something he was happy about. Naturally, he was also excited to have such a relationship with Blue. He had experienced the sorrow of having no power today. It was clearly Blue's carriage that skidded and knocked over their shelves. Yet he had to blame his shop and be beaten up. He had thought he wouldn't be able to survive. Fortunately, he was saved thanks to his relationship with Barbara. You really like whipping people, don't you? Have you ever tasted the feeling of being whipped? Grey said coldly as he looked at Shixen. Give him 10 lashes. Let him have a taste of what it's like to be whipped. Yes. Smack, smack, smack. A quick-witted guard stepped forward and removed Shixen's outer coat before whipping him viciously. The noble youth before him was usually someone they had to curry favor with. They had to be polite when speaking to him, let alone whip him. But now, he wasn't afraid at all. He knew Blue wouldn't dare to take revenge on him. On the other hand, if he could use this chance to attract Grey's attention, he might be able to gain some recognition. After 10 lashes, 10 bloody marks appeared on the noble youth's body. His clothes were even torn in some places. On account of Lord Elio's decades of hard work for the Fergus family, I'll let you off this time. As for how you want to compensate the shop, you can decide for yourself. After that, Grey left with Barbara and the rest. There were still things he had to deal with in the camp. Blue was brought away for treatment with Barbara and the rest accompanying him. In one of the rooms in the camp, Grey sat on a chair and tapped on the tea table beside him. Opposite him, the small-eyed, sharp-chinned captain of the city guard knelt on the ground with a pale face. More than 10 people, including the city guard commander, stood cautiously and nervously. His gaze swept across the dozen or so people and finally landed on the city guard commander. Whose city guard are you? Who do you work for? Young Master Grey, we're the Fergus family city guard. We work for the Fergus family. Cold sweat slid down his forehead as the city guard commander lowered his head and said, Since you know you're the Fergus family city guard and work for the Fergus family, what have you done? Grey coldly stared at the dozen or so people. Working for the nobles of other families, working for rich merchants. Is this how you work for the Fergus family? Grey's voice wasn't loud. It sounded like he was just speaking calmly, but the 10-odd people couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. Grey looked at the small-eyed, sharp-chinned man and said coldly, You're such a traitor. Traitor, you're taking the salary of the Fergus family, but working for other nobles. Young Master Grey, I was wrong. The small-eyed, sharp-chinned man slapped himself hard with his left and right hands. Both sides of his face were swollen as he panicked. Grey couldn't be bothered with him anymore as he looked at the captain of the city guard. Revoke his position as captain of the city guard. Let the city guard who whipped him replace him. Those who participated this time will be kicked out after 50 lashes. Yes, young Master Gray. The captain of the city guard hurriedly replied. Those of you who didn't participate don't think you'll be fine after dodging it this time. Gray glanced at the 10-odd captains of the city guard who were standing cautiously. Remember this. Next time, if I don't meet anyone who does personal business, it's fine if I don't meet them. But if I do, you know the consequences. The 10-odd people were so scared that their expressions changed drastically as they hurriedly said that they didn't dare. Chapter 262. The carriage was on its way back to Fergus Castle. Young Master Gray, thank you. Within the carriage, Bobla looked gratefully at Gray. She knew very well that if it wasn't for Gray standing up for her brother and saving him today, her brother would most likely have been beaten to death. She felt a wave of lingering fear at the thought of that. No need. Gray shook his head slightly as he held Bobla's soft hand in his. It would have been fine if it had been anyone else, but since it was Bobla's brother, he couldn't just leave him be. He had long heard about the mess the nobles had made in Fergus City. This was a good opportunity to clean things up. I'm going to let your parents and brother work in the Fergus family shop. What do you think? I'll listen to young Master Gray, Bobla said as she leaned her head on Gray's shoulder. Good. I'll have someone make the arrangements when we return to the castle. Gray nodded. The shop had already been wrecked, and the location wasn't that great. There was no need to keep it open. It would be better to work as a manager in the Fergus family shop. The monthly profits would definitely be many times that of the small shop. The Cullen family's residence in Fergus City. Young Master Shix has been injured. A servant hurried into the study and reported to Lord Elliot. Injured by someone? All he does is mess around. He'll suffer sooner or later. Great, now he's suffering. Lord Elliot's face was filled with rage. He wasn't just displeased with his son. However, he still sighed and asked with concern, Is it serious? While he didn't have much hope for this son of his, he couldn't bear to leave him be. It's quite serious. His clothes are covered in blood. The servant didn't dare to hide anything and told him everything he saw. Lord Elliot's brow slowly furrowed. While he was a good-for-nothing, he was still Lord Elliot's son. Most people would know their limits and wouldn't be too heavy-handed. However, this time around, it was clear that he had been heavy-handed. He stood up, walked out of the study, and walked towards Hicks's bedroom. He went to the bedroom and saw Hicks being drugged by a servant. There were a few clear whip marks all over Schick's body. Every single one of them was blood red, with blood seeping out of them. His skin had been torn. Every lash of the whip hit the flesh. It was obvious that the person who did this did not show any mercy. He couldn't help but frown even more. He was instantly dissatisfied with the person who attacked. The other party didn't give him any face at all. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so heavy-handed. He had wanted to give Shixon a good scolding, but he gave up when he thought about how Shixon had already been punished. Who did you offend this time? Hearing his father's voice, Shixon's expression changed. He was most afraid of running into his father. Speak, who is it? Seeing Shix remain silent, Lord Elio yelled angrily, What are you waiting for? Shixon was quite frightened by Lord Elliot's rage. He had no choice but to bite the bullet. It's young Master Gray. Cough, cough. What? You actually offended. Young Master Gray? Hearing Shixon's words, Lord Elliot almost choked on his own breath. Are you trying to piss me off? As a lord, he knew all too well what kind of status Gray Fergus had in the Fergus Dominion. The Fergus family was now a count. While Earl Fergus was still the head of the Fergus family in name, the true master of the Fergus Dominion was young Master Gray, who was not even 20 years old. Because he was worried that his children would provoke this young Master Gray. After receiving the news yesterday, he specially gathered all of his children and solemnly warned them not to provoke this young Master Gray. Now, they had already offended him on the second day. At that moment, he even had the heart to skin his son alive. Speak. Tell me everything from the beginning to the end. Yes, father. Shixon couldn't help but shudder in the face of Lord Elio's rage. He didn't dare to hide anything and hurriedly told him everything. Idiot, why did I give birth to you in the first place? After hearing Shixon's story, Lord Elio was so angry he wanted nothing more than to skin his unfilial son alive. It was one thing for him to be unreasonable, He didn't even investigate the other party's background before being so impulsive. His stupidity was beyond redemption. This time, he had directly poked it all the way to young Master Gray. Not only did he harm himself, he also harmed House Kulun. While young Master Gray said he wouldn't hold it against them, there was no guarantee that he wouldn't dislike House Kulun. Given Kulun's current status, he would definitely affect Earl Fergus's decisions. In this special period when the Fergus family was promoted to a count, the other families were all rubbing their hands in anticipation. If House Cullen was excluded from certain decisions by Earl Fergus because of this, they would regret it immensely. At the thought of that, he really wished he hadn't given birth to this son. If he had a whip in his hand, he wouldn't hesitate to whip him 10 more times. Go, quickly get 10 gold coins and compensate that shop. He gave it some thought and ordered Shiksen, who was still applying medicine. So much. Shiksen was shocked. A small shop was definitely enough to be bought for tens of silvers, yet he had to pay 10 gold coins. It really pained him. Idiot, you're still thinking about money. Seeing Shiksen act so stupid and not understand the severity of the matter, Lord Elio was so angry his veins were popping. Go apologize to me. If you don't get forgiven, just pretend I never gave birth to you. Shiksen finally felt that the severity of the matter exceeded his expectations. His father actually said something like, pretend I never gave birth to you, and it didn't seem to be something he said out of anger. What's with Hurry up and go. After sending Shiksen away, Lord Elio hurriedly got on his carriage and went to Fergus Castle. Within the messy shop, Bobbla's parents were packing up the goods with heartache. Her brother, Blue, sat on a stool. He was covered in injuries and couldn't help pack the goods at all, as the slightest movement would cause him to grimace in pain. You're here again. Footsteps could be heard coming from the door. He looked up and saw Shiksen walking in with 2 servants. His expression changed immediately. Bobbla's parents looked up and saw them. Their expressions changed as well. They held their brooms and shovels in their hands and looked at the other party warily. They thought that the other party held a grudge after being taught a lesson by young Master Gray and came to take revenge. What surprised them was that the other party didn't appear arrogant or domineering at all. Instead, he said with a pale face, I apologize. What happened before was my fault. I'm willing to compensate you with 10 gold coins. I hope you can forgive me. You want to compensate us? 10 gold coins at that? Barbara's parents, Barbara's brother, Blue, almost thought he had misheard. Even though young Master Gray had asked for compensation, they didn't take it seriously. It was already good enough that they were able to keep their lives. They didn't think it was possible for a noble to compensate them. After all, they had never seen a noble compensate a commoner before. Yet, the other party was actually prepared to compensate them, and 10 gold coins at that. Their goods added up to no more than 30 silvers. Yet the other party wanted to compensate them with 10 gold coins. Gold coins, gold coins. Although they had seen them before, they had never touched them before, because any one of them was worth more than all of their wealth. Yes, I'm willing to compensate you with 10 gold coins to make up for your losses. I only hope you can forgive me. Hicks nodded, his face slightly pale. He didn't dare to be arrogant or domineering now, much less use his power to oppress the other party. He could tell that his father's words of, take it as if you never had this son, were not just spoken out of anger. Looking at the humble, noble young master before them, Barbara's parents and brother were in disbelief. The noble young master was actually apologizing to them. Sure. The 3 of them discussed softly before Barbara's brother, Blue, finally spoke up. Even though they weren't afraid of the other party because of their relationship with Barbara, the other party was a noble young master after all. Since the other party was willing to compensate them with 10 gold coins, they naturally had no reason to reject it. Receiving the cloth bag containing the 10 gold coins, feeling the cold metallic texture of the gold coins, and feeling the heaviness in their hands, Barbara's parents and brother, Blue, felt as if they were in a dream. They had never touched gold coins in their entire lives. Now, they finally had the chance to touch them, and 10 at that. It made them feel as if everything that happened before them was far too surreal. It was as if they were in a daydream that they could wake up from at any moment. In Fergus Castle, A servant came to report to Gray outside his training room. Young Master Gray, Lord Elliot wishes to see you. Got it. Gray hummed in response and exited his training. After wiping his sweat, he walked to the hall. He wasn't surprised at the other party's arrival, as he had already expected it. He would only be surprised if the other party didn't come. Naturally, he would have some thoughts about House Cullen in the future. When he entered the hall, he saw a middle-aged man with a rather high hairline sitting nervously in the middle of the room. Seeing his arrival, the man immediately stood up and welcomed him. Young Master Gray, I already know what that bastard Shixon did. I apologize to you on behalf of House Cullen. As he said that, he bowed slightly. Chapter 263. Lord Elliot, you don't have to be like this. He is him, and you are you. This has nothing to do with you. Gray shook his head slightly. Plus, the matter with Shix is already over. I have already punished him. I do feel a little apologetic for taking the initiative to punish him. It's the Cullen family's fault for not disciplining that unfilial son. It's the Cullen family's honor that young Master Gray is willing to discipline him on behalf of the Cullen family. Lord Elliot waved his hand and said, Lord Elliot, what do you think of Fergus City now? Gray didn't want to dwell on this topic. Instead, he asked, It's very prosperous. I've been to the nearby Oliver City and Rock City before. They're even worse than Fergus City. Lord Elliot replied, For a city to prosper, rules, order, and stability are essential. If you break the rules just because you're a noble, the city won't be stable and prosperous. Gray said, On the other hand, if the city and even the territory can't prosper, the nobles who rely on taxes for income will slowly decline. You're right, young Master Gray. Lord Elliot thought about it carefully. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that although Gray's words were easy to understand, they contained a lot of logic. He couldn't help but say respectfully, Although nobles have the power to surpass commoners, if they really treat commoners like fish on the chopping block, they will only harm themselves in the end. Gray said calmly, although he was only a normal office worker in his previous life, he came from a world where information was exploding. His perspective on things was naturally far-sighted. The two chatted for a while more before Lord Elliot stood up and bid farewell. Gray let the servants send him out of Fergus Castle. A few days later, a grand banquet was held in Fergus Castle. Apart from the Fergus family and the subordinate nobles, many nobles who were close to the Fergus family, including Count Ford, were invited to the banquet. Naturally, the newly promoted Iveline family was included as well. Congratulations to the Fergus family. Congratulations to Count Ford. In a huge banquet hall, the sound of crystal cups colliding could be heard from time to time. The atmosphere was extremely lively. The gap is getting bigger and bigger. I didn't expect you to be a berserker now. Raising his crystal glass and clinking it with Gray, Twain Ford smiled bitterly. To be able to be nurtured as the next successor of the Ford clan, his talent in cultivation was naturally not bad. He was often referred to as a genius. Unfortunately, compared to Gray, the disparity was too great. I was just lucky enough to obtain some high-grade Bloodfiend's blood. Gray shook his head slightly and finished the red wine in his glass. Gray had a pretty good impression of the successor of the Ford family. When they first came into contact, the Fergus family was only a Viscount family, and they did not reveal their berserk-level blood fiends. Even then, the other party did not have an arrogant attitude. What are you talking about? Didn't they see that because the two of you were together, they thought that the two of you were discussing something important, causing many noble ladies to not dare to disturb you? Hazel, the daughter of Count Ford, walked over in an exquisite long dress. She looked at the two of them and joked, Let's talk about the many noble ladies here. Who is the prettiest? Twain Ford smiled. Who is the prettiest? It was indeed a woman's nature to love beauty. Hazel's eyes lit up when she heard this question. Of course it's Miss Hazel. The corners of Tang N. Ford's mouth curled up slightly as he smiled at Gray. Don't you think so, Gray? Yes, it's indeed Miss Hazel. Since just now, many nobles' gazes have been fixed on you. Gray smiled and nodded in agreement. Hazel was indeed quite pretty. She had a standard oval face, abnormally fair skin, and a slender figure. coupled with the long dress specially designed by the tailor, it would not be an exaggeration to say that she was one of the prettiest people. Big brother, and Gray, you too? Hazel blushed slightly as she rebuked the two of them in dissatisfaction. After chatting with the Ford siblings for a while, Gray bade them farewell with a smile. As the host, he naturally had to entertain the guests in the banquet hall. Young Master Gray, it's a pleasure to meet you. However, he helplessly realized that almost all the guests he entertained were noble ladies. It was not that he deliberately chose noble ladies to entertain. Although he was not averse to beautiful things, it was not to the extent of being biased to such an extent. Instead, many noble ladies who thought they were good-looking came forward to chat with him, either tactfully or generously. With Gray's potential, there was no need to elaborate further. Naturally, many noble ladies had their eyes on him. In fact, many of these noble ladies had already set their sights on Gray before they came. Many of them were incited by their families, and many of them had their own plans. Be it for their families or for themselves, becoming the other half of such a future powerhouse was clearly a good choice. Young Master Gray, what hobbies do you have? A noble lady with a slightly low neckline asked with a charming smile. Her cleavage could already be vaguely seen. I don't have many hobbies. If we're talking about hobbies, hunting should be one. Gray thought for a while and said, Big brother. At a table far away, Caroline and Sarah were seated. Sarah waved at Gray from afar. My apologies, excuse me. Gray smiled at her and gracefully bowed before walking to the table and sitting down. Big brother, you're very busy. Seeing Gray sit down, Sarah immediately joked. If you dare to tease me again, be careful that As Gray spoke, he made a gesture of flicking his finger. Immediately, the latter covered his forehead and shrank his head back. Don't flick my forehead, it will make me ugly. At the side, Caroline, wearing a purple dress, asked with a smile. Gray, what do you think of them? I don't want to consider them at the moment. Gray shook his head. In this world, nobles could have many lovers, but in terms of wives, they could only have one. He had to consider carefully. But Sister Caroline, there were many noble youths who took the initiative to talk to you. Are there any that caught your eye? Caroline was about a year older than Gray and was now 20 years old. In this world, where nobles married late and had children late, although it was still early, it was enough to consider. Caroline rolled her eyes when she was teased by Gray. However, she didn't try to hide it and said directly, Don't worry. That's too exaggerated. Exaggerated? Gray observed a moment of silence for these noble youths. Since Caroline said such words, then these noble youths basically had no hope. The banquet started at noon and only ended in the evening. The nobles who were closer to Fergus territory took the carriage back to their territory. The nobles who were farther away stayed the night and set off again. Compared to the Earl's family, the current castle is too small. It needs to be expanded. The next day, in the study, Earl Fergus said solemnly, It is indeed a little too small. Bernal agreed. He had been to Earl Ford's castle before. It was much bigger and grander than the current Fergus castle. In comparison, Fergus Castle was undoubtedly a level lower. Since the Fergus family was now an Earl's family, the castle's level naturally could not be too low. Otherwise, it would be looked down upon by other noble families. After all, a castle was the face of a noble family. The current Fergus Castle can no longer be expanded. We can only find a new place to build a castle. Gray said after some thought. Gray supported the expansion of the Fergus family's castle. A castle was a place for nobles to enjoy themselves. Naturally, it needed to be built well. Gray would not object to enjoyment. In the end, why did people desire things like power and strength so much? Wasn't it to obtain a better life and better enjoyment? That's true. Viscount Fergus nodded. Where do you think is suitable to build a new castle? To the south of Fergus City, there is a rocky slope without many trees. It is quite suitable to build a castle there. Bernal said after some thought. That place is indeed quite suitable. The three of them were naturally familiar with the vicinity of Fergus City. The moment Bernal mentioned it, Gray and Earl Fergus already knew where he was referring to. However, it is winter now, and transportation is inconvenient. We can only wait until spring next year to start construction. Not only does Fergus Castle need to be rebuilt, but Fergus City also needs to be expanded. Gray mentioned. The largest city in Earl Ford's territory, Ford City, had a permanent population of about 300,000. Fergus City, on the other hand, only had about 30,000. In comparison, it was too shabby. Bernal nodded. Fergus City is easy to handle. There's still a lot of empty land around it. We just need to expand on the original foundation. However, the time it will take will probably be longer than Fergus Castle. The construction of a city was obviously a much larger project than the construction of a castle. Even if it was an expansion on the original foundation, it would still be the same. The territory needs to specially promote a group of management talents to take over the cities and towns in the territory. Do you have any recommendations? Viscount Fergus asked. The eldest son of my hometown's mayor, Barnett, is not bad, Gray said casually. The last time they went to my hometown, Barnett had left a good impression on Gray. Since there was a chance, Gray did not recommend helping him. This was not because he wanted to establish his own power or anything. To him, the Fergus family's power was his own, and there was no distinction between them. After he inherited the title, if there was anyone who did not agree, he would just suppress them. In the face of absolute strength, all resistance was futile. He had no interest in scheming against others. Chapter 264. After staying in the Fergus family for a few days, there was less than a month left before he could consume the blood of the blood fiends again. After confirming that the Fergus family was stable in all aspects, Gray hurriedly left Fergus Castle and headed for Mercenary City. He rode in the Fergus family's carriage. Although riding a horse was faster, riding a horse in the snowy winter was not a very pleasant experience. Even though his body was extremely resistant to the cold, he obviously did not want to choose such a masochistic path. The carriage moved forward in the snow. Within the warm carriage, Gray held the map in his hand and raised his eyebrows. This was a map of the entire Purple Moon Kingdom. There was a route on the map that started from Fergus territory and extended all the way out of Sydney territory. After passing through Marquis territory, one would arrive at the destination after traveling some distance in a territory that did not belong to any noble family. Looking at the Marquis territory that they had to pass through, Gray raised his eyebrows slightly. The name of the territory was Oka territory. Gray was no stranger to this territory because he had been to this place before and had explored the ruins in the Blue Sea Forest located in this place. The reason why he frowned slightly was naturally because there was a family that he had bad blood with in this place. After exploring the ruins and coming out of the Azure Sea Forest, Gray had a conflict with the giant crocodile mercenary band. He had destroyed the mercenary band, which eventually led to the enmity between him and the Mesfi family. Should we take a detour? Gray raised his eyebrows. In the end, he shook his head and said, No, a Marquis territory was quite large. If one wanted to go around it, the time it would take would most likely be more than double the original amount of time. Time was already tight. If they took a longer detour, they might not even reach Mercenary City in a month. Gray was naturally unwilling to do so. You better not provoke me. Otherwise, I don't mind teaching you a lesson. The current him was no longer the ferocious warrior who had to rush back to Sydney territory in the middle of the night because of the Mesfi family's pursuit. With the realm of a blood berserker, coupled with the numerous powerful abilities of his blood fiends, his combat strength had already reached the peak of the berserker stage. In terms of strength, he was no longer afraid of the Mesfi clan. If the Mesfi clan had a conflict with him, the one who would suffer in the end would definitely be the Mesfi clan. The only thing he needed to worry about was the attitude of the owner of the Orca family. However, he was the successor of the Count's family from the Sydney family. Behind him stood the Sydney family, which was one of the most powerful families in the Marquis family. As long as he didn't go overboard, the Orca family wouldn't risk offending the Sydney family by attacking him. Traveling during the day and staying at a tavern at night, several days later, the carriage entered the territory of Marquis Oka. The journey was smooth and unobstructed. Few caravans were willing to travel in the cold weather, and the bandits were naturally the same. In the evening, The carriage stopped in front of the town's only tavern. After parking the carriage and the horses, Gray opened the door of the tavern with the servants. Ding-ling-ling. Along with the sound of the bell, the door of the tavern was pushed open, and a wave of warmth immediately rushed in. The cold wind whistled outside, and snowflakes danced in the air. In the tavern, under the flickering lights, several tables of people were dining. From the way they dressed, there were mercenaries and peddlers who braved the cold weather to do business. In the tavern, there was only one table left. Gray and the servants sat at the table, took the menu from the waiter, and ordered a portion that was too much for the two of them. The waiter looked at Gray and the servant with slight surprise, but didn't say anything. He took the menu and returned to the kitchen. After operating the tavern for so long, he would meet all kinds of people. Moreover, Gray's clothes were obviously very expensive, so the waiter wasn't worried that Gray couldn't afford it. The food they ordered was delivered, and Gray and the servant ate by themselves. When they were outside, Gray didn't care about the master and servant eating at the same table. He wasn't that sick of nobles. Ding-ling-ling. At this moment, the bell on the door of the tavern rang again. A gust of cold wind blew in from outside, causing the people eating at the tables in the tavern to look at the door. Gray and the servant were no exception. In the cold wind, four people walked into the tavern, led by a young man and a young woman. The man had long green hair that reached his shoulders, tied behind his head. His handsome face and long hair complemented each other. He didn't look feminine and was a very handsome man. The woman had long green hair that reached her waist, a standard oval face, and large eyes. She gave off a very spirited feeling. There was a pair of sapphire earrings on each of her ears, adding a unique charm to her already beautiful appearance. From the way they dressed, the two of them should be of noble birth, and if there were no surprises, they should be brother and sister. The reason for this was because the two of them had the same hair color. In this world, hair color was usually related to genetics. The two of them had very rare green hair, and they appeared together. The possibility of them being brother and sister was higher. The two men behind them, an old man and a middle-aged man, were not poorly dressed, but surprisingly, the two of them acted like servants in front of the man and woman. Young master, there are no more individual tables. The old man had a knife at his waist. He looked around the tavern and frowned slightly. It's fine. We're outside, so there's no need to be so particular. You and Uncle Bob can share a table over there. The green-haired young man, Elijah, said. Okay. The two men walked toward the table with only two people sitting at it. Two mercenaries in leather armor sat at the table. When they saw the two men arrive, their faces stiffened. Clearly, they weren't very willing to share a table with others. However, they didn't reject the two men's offer, probably because they could tell that the two men weren't to be trifled with. Sorry to disturb you. May I share a table with you? After letting the two men leave, the green-haired young man, Elijah, swept his gaze around the tavern before bringing the green-haired young woman, Samantha, to Gray's table. He spoke politely to Gray. Please. Gray gestured with one hand, indicating for the two to do as they pleased. The reason he agreed wasn't because the two of them were nobles. When they were outside, making things convenient for others was making things convenient for themselves. Who knew when he would encounter such a situation? Thank you. The green-haired young man, Elijah, nodded slightly to Gray and brought the green-haired young woman, Samantha, to sit at the two empty seats. After ordering, the two of them waited. The green-haired young woman, Samantha, rubbed her slightly frozen hands and asked, Second brother, how much longer until we reach Mercenary City? About 7 or 8 days. The green-haired young man, Elijah, thought for a moment. That long? Samantha sighed softly. It didn't take this long the last time you were there, did it? It was summer the last time I was there. It's winter now, and there's snow everywhere. Naturally, it will take longer than that time. Elijah explained. Mercenary City? During the meal, Gray raised his head in surprise and glanced at the two of them. He hadn't expected that the destination of this group would also be Mercenary City. But when he thought about how Mercenary City was a place where mercenaries gathered, and how he could often obtain some good things from the mercenaries who traveled the world, he understood why. Although they were going to the same destination, he had no intention of striking up a conversation, nor did he intend to travel with them. After a moment of surprise, he continued to eat. After finishing his meal and booking 2 rooms at the counter, Gray and his servant went upstairs under the guidance of the tavern's clerk. Not long after Gray went upstairs, the mercenaries who had shared a table with the old man and the middle-aged man stood up to pay the bill and left the tavern under the cover of the night. The old man and the middle-aged man who shared a table with them watched the 2 mercenaries leave, a thoughtful look in their eyes. From their position, they could observe many things. Having finished their meal, they sat in the seats left behind by Gray and his servant. These 2 mercenaries are strange. It's so late, but they still want to leave the tavern. Samantha said curiously, "It's indeed strange." Elijah nodded slightly. This tavern was the only tavern in the town, and it was already dark outside. Logically speaking, they should have stayed in the tavern at this time. "We can guess at the reason," the old man with a saber said with a smile. "Grandpa Will, what's going on?" Samantha asked curiously. "When we were eating, we noticed that these 2 would occasionally glance at your table. If I'm not mistaken, these 2 should have their eyes on that pair of master and servant." The old man with the blade said, "They've their eyes on those 2? Samantha frowned slightly and looked at the green-haired young man. "Second brother, should we remind those 2? "No need." Elijah shook his head. "Those 2 are not simple. If these 2 mercenaries have their eyes on them, they might not be the ones at a disadvantage." "How do you know?" Samantha asked curiously. "Don't you think that young man's appetite is a little too big?" Elijah smiled. "It is indeed a little too big." Samantha nodded. Generally speaking, as a blood warrior's strength increased, their appetite would also increase. However, it was rare to see a blood warrior to such an exaggerated extent. He has such an appetite, but he doesn't look fat. On one hand, it should be because this man is the type that doesn't gain weight easily. On the other hand, this man's strength shouldn't be too bad, and his body's need for nutrition should be quite high. Elijah judged. Chapter 265. "Are you sure it's that guy?" one of the mercenaries asked as they led the horse away from the pub. "I'm sure it's the guy that the Mesty family put a bounty on." The other mercenary nodded in confirmation. After the giant crocodile mercenary group was destroyed, the Mesty family had put up a bounty on Gray. Anyone who provided information would receive a huge reward. Although it had been a long time, there were still some mercenaries who did not forget about the bounty. The bounty was too big for them to forget. "There's a Mesty family shop in Coldwind City, not far from here. Let's go, let's go." Thinking of the huge reward, the 2 of them were burning with passion. Although it was snowing in the night, they did not feel cold at all. With a lantern in one hand and a horse in the other, he rode towards Coldwind City, braving the knife-like wind and snow. The next day, Gray and his servant set off. Because they were on the same route, Gray and the rest would meet with the master and his servants from time to time. There was not much enthusiasm between the 2 parties. When they met, they only nodded slightly. A few days later, it was close to noon. The snow was still falling. Gray was about to stop and eat some dry food before continuing on. Suddenly, ong! The sound of horses neighing could be heard. 3 strong horses galloped towards them. Their limbs were slender and strong. Compared to ordinary horses, they were taller. Even on the snowy ground, they were still running as if they were flying. The color of their fur was different. One was black, one was brown, and one was yellow. The colors were different, but without exception, their fur was extremely soft and smooth, as if they had been taken care of. These 3 horses were not inferior to the scarlet horse that Gray had given to Sarah. The 3 horses galloped towards them. The servant driving the carriage, Dolly, did not take it seriously. But soon he noticed something strange. When the 3 horses were about to reach the carriage, they actually spread out and surrounded the carriage in the middle. Creak! The servant driving the carriage was shocked. He quickly stopped the carriage and shouted in panic, "Young Master Gray, there's whoosh!" In fact, Gray had already reacted before the servant driving the carriage called out. He opened the carriage door and appeared outside the carriage. Appearing outside the carriage, the first thing Gray saw was a man sitting on a black horse. This was a man who seemed to be over 50 years old. He had light brown hair and many wrinkles on his face. When he saw Gray looking at him, he also looked at Gray and snorted coldly. "Gray Fergus, how dare you appear in Oka territory?" Back then, after the destruction of the great evil mercenary group and the loss of 2 ferocious blood warriors, he, as the head of the Mesfi family, had personally pursued them all the way to Sydney Hill. At that time, Gray was already somewhat famous in Sydney, and he quickly found out about Gray's identity. He knew that Gray was a descendant of the Viscount family of Sydney Hill. If he continued to pursue him in Sydney Hill, it was likely that he would attract the attention of the Sydney family. In the end, he could only give up. However, it was obviously impossible for the Mesfi family to give up just like that. After all, the Mesfi family had lost 3 ferocious blood warriors to Gray. This was a huge grudge. If they could not act in Sydney Hill, could they not act outside of Sydney Hill? After all, the other party was only a descendant of the Viscount family. The Sydney family did not pay much attention to him. If he was killed outside of Sydney Hill, the Sydney family would definitely not stand up for him. The Sydney family was not a nanny. They would not avenge the death of a descendant of a lesser noble just because the lesser noble complained. Moreover, it was very likely that the other nobles of the Marquis family would be involved. Even the Sydney family would have to consider whether it was worth it. Therefore, the Mesfi family had been keeping an eye on Gray's movements. At first, they did not cancel the bounty on Gray in order to wait for an opportunity like this. For this reason, they even used the connections of the Mesfi family in the mercenary circle to spread the bounty to mercenaries in other Sydney Hill territories. He did not expect that this time, not only did the other party leave Sydney Hill, but also directly enter Oka Hill. In his opinion, this was not an ordinary kind of courage. Whoosh! Gray did not speak. He flashed out of the carriage as if he was fleeing in panic. "Don't let him escape." The head of the Mesfi family snorted and quickly jumped off his horse. Thump! 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 Every step he took was powerful and heavy. Snow splashed everywhere, and snow pits appeared on the ground. He looked clumsy, but in fact he was very fast. Soon he blocked Gray's path. The other 2 people behind also jumped off their horses and landed behind Gray. With the head of the Mesfi family in front and 2 behind, they blocked Gray in the middle. Don't you think it's too late to escape now? Blocking Gray's path, the head of the Mesfi family looked at Gray contemptuously. Escape? I'm not escaping. Gray shook his head and chuckled. From the beginning, he did not intend to escape. The only reason he acted like he was escaping was to get away from the carriage. It was freezing cold. He did not want the carriage to be affected by the battle and end up in a situation where he had to walk in the snow. Young Master Gray. The servant driving the carriage saw that Gray was blocked by 3 people and could not help but anxiously call out, "It's okay. Drive the carriage a little further away, or we'll be affected by our battle." "But, don't worry, it's okay." Gray shook his head slightly and motioned for the servant to drive the carriage away. The servant driving the carriage had a hesitant expression, but in the end he obeyed Gray's orders and drove the carriage away. His name was Dolly. When Earl Fergus knew that Gray was going to Mercenary City, he had specially chosen the servant to drive the carriage from among the elite soldiers. Although he did not practice blood magic, he had the strength of a lower blood warrior through training his body. Dealing with ordinary trouble was no problem for him, but this kind of situation was obviously not something he could participate in. Seeing the servant driving the carriage away, the 3 members of the Mesfi family did not stop him. Their target was not the servant driving the carriage, but Gray. In their eyes, the servant driving the carriage was like an ant that they could crush at any time. He was completely unimportant. A carriage stopped a few hundred meters away from where Gray and the Mesfi family were facing off. 4 people walked out of the carriage. They were the master and servants that Gray had frequently encountered in the past few days. "Second brother, are you sure he can handle it?" Samantha looked suspiciously at Elijah when she saw the Mesfi family head step out. I didn't expect him to be so good at causing trouble," Elijah said rather helplessly. "There's actually a berserker among the people he provoked." "Young master, do you want me to save him?" "Will," the elder with the sword asked. Even though he saw that the other party had a berserker and 2 ferocious blood warriors, the elder was still extremely confident. No need. Elijah shook his head and quietly looked at the tense atmosphere in the distance. Although my impression of him is not bad, we have no reason to help him since we are not related to him. After confirming that the servant driving the carriage had retreated more than 100 meters away, Gray looked at the Mesfi family head. Speaking of which, the grudges between me and the Mesfi family were all brought on by your Mesfi family. The giant crocodile mercenary group relied on their strength to rob the mercenaries that came out of the Jade Sea Forest. They even dared to rob me, so I destroyed them. The other two ferocious blood warriors wanted to kill me the moment they appeared, so I killed them as well. The Mesfi family was the one who made the first move, so I was forced to retaliate. Is there any meaning in saying this? The Mesfi family head shook his head in disdain. No matter what the reason was, the Mesfi family had lost 3 ferocious blood warriors because of Gray Fergus was a fact. At this point, it was no longer important what the reason was. The grudge had been formed, and it could only be resolved with the other party's life. It is indeed meaningless. Gray nodded faintly, agreeing with the Mesfi family's words. His current situation with the Mesfi family made him think of the Sydney family and the Wallen family. No one knew what the reason for the grudge between the two families was, but in the past few hundred years, the two families had suffered many casualties because of each other. The grudge was no longer important. What was important was that the grudge couldn't be resolved. Swish! At the same time, the 3 people from the Mesfi family moved. The 3 of them approached Gray from the front and back at the same time. The fastest was the head of the Macefield family. In just 2 steps, he had already closed in on Gray. With a battle axe in hand, he hacked at Gray. Above his axe, a green light twined around it, giving people a feeling of extreme sharpness. As he chopped down with his axe, the surrounding wind and snow seemed to have been split into 2, and there was a moment of stagnation. Swish! A sword flickering with lightning appeared. The blazing blue and white lightning constantly crackled. The surrounding wind and snow had already disappeared before they could even get close. Rumble! The violent sound of weapons colliding was heard. Strong wind whistled. The surrounding wind and snow was blown away, and a snow-free area with a diameter of more than 10 meters appeared. The snow under their feet splashed in all directions. They were evenly matched. Neither of them had the upper hand. The pupils of the Mesfi family had shrunk, and a trace of surprise appeared on his face. This was a very surprising result. The other party could actually block his attack. Swish, swish! A long saber wrapped in lightning and a long sword wrapped in flames, carrying the power of thunder, quickly attacked Gray from behind. The ones who attacked were the 2 ferocious blood warriors from the Mesfi family behind Gray. Seeing that Gray blocked the attack of the family head, they were also surprised. However, the weapons in their hands attacked Gray from the back without any hesitation. Chapter 266. Swish, swish! The saber wrapped in lightning and the sword wrapped in flames were like a bolt of lightning and a ball of flame. They attacked Gray from behind. Whoosh! Gray dodged like a gust of wind, easily dodging the attacks of the 2. His speed was one of the best among the berserkers. It was not difficult for him to dodge the attacks of 2 ferocious blood warriors. After dodging, he looked coldly at the 2 men and slashed an icy wind blade at them. Swish! The icy green wind blade was 2 meters long. It was sparkling and translucent, as if it was polished from jade. It swiftly slashed at the 2 men. In an instant, the biting cold wind and the terrifying snowstorm were all split apart. Wherever it passed, it was as if the snowstorm automatically avoided it. Not good. Danger. Seeing this wind blade slashing towards them, a hair-raising sense of danger suddenly surfaced in the hearts of the 2 men. It was as though a knife was placed on their necks. The 2 of them cried out in fear and quickly dodged to the side. Swish! The huge icy wind blade swept past the 2 men at close range. The sharp edge of the blade made their expressions change drastically. Cold sweat slid down their foreheads, but before they could heave a sigh of relief, all of a sudden, a gust of icy air attacked them. They felt cold all over and involuntarily froze on the spot. Crack! 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 The ice spread to their bodies. In the blink of an eye, the two men were covered in ice and turned into two lifelike ice sculptures. The strongest part of the icy wind blade was not the cutting power of the wind blade. Instead, it was the ice ability that was integrated into it. After all, it came from a special ice attribute Blood Fiend. The two men thought that the crisis was over after dodging the wind blade. They did not know that the crisis had just begun. In the distance, the green-haired young man and the other three men could not help but squint their eyes. Facing a berserker and two ferocious blood warriors, not only did he easily block the berserker's attack, but he also dodged the two ferocious blood warriors' attack from behind. He even counterattacked and easily froze the two ferocious blood warriors into ice sculptures. Even they could not help but be astonished by this strength. This man is definitely a berserker, the old man with the saber, Will, said in surprise. And he must have practiced a special blood technique, Elijah said with a solemn expression. Second brother, you guessed it right. Samantha was slightly surprised. This person is really not simple. He's younger than you, second brother, but he's actually a berserker just like you. Could this person be from the other two clans? Bob asked suspiciously. No. Elijah shook his head. I know about the special blood methods of the other two clans. The blood method that this person cultivates is definitely not one of them. Because they did not know Gray's background, the first thing they thought of was blood techniques, not bloodline mutation. Betsy, Burke, the patriarch of the Mesfi clan, was shocked and furious. He originally thought that he could easily crush his opponent, but the tables had suddenly turned. Not only did he block his attack, he even froze two of his subordinates into ice sculptures. The instant reversal of the transfer shocked him, but what made him feel even more furious? They had already lost 3 ferocious blood warriors to the other party. Now, 2 more ferocious blood warriors were missing. Bastard! He let out a furious roar and abruptly stomped his foot on the ground. Snow splattered on the ground, and a huge mud stream rose from the ground, curling up to a height of more than 10 meters. Like a huge mud snake, it attacked Gray. As for himself, he quickly came to the side of his 2 subordinates. Both of his hands were like 2 iron hammers. He did not care about injuring the 2 of them. He struck them several times, shattering the ice on their bodies, and checked their breathing and heartbeat. The next moment, his expression became extremely ugly. Dead. His 2 subordinates' bodies were ice cold. There was no breath or heartbeat. They were already dead. With Gray's current strength, he could reach the peak even among ferocious blood warriors. The Blood Fiend ability he used was naturally extremely powerful. The 2 ferocious blood warriors were frozen by the cold air of the ice wind blade. Death was inevitable. Swish! Facing the fierce mud snake, Gray slashed out an ice wind blade in front of him. Pooh! The mud snake was cut into 2. Not only that, but the 2 halves of the mud snake were also covered by ice. With a loud crash, the 2 halves smashed into the ground, causing snow to splatter everywhere. Even the ground was smashed into 2 pits. Gray Fergus, laying the bodies of his 2 subordinates flat on the ground. The head of the Mesfi family gritted his teeth and looked at Gray with bloodshot eyes. Swish! The huge mud snake rose from the ground again and attacked Gray with a terrifying momentum. Not only that, he also rushed toward Gray with an axe in his hand. Boom! Gray slashed out an ice wind blade, once again cutting the mud snake into 2 halves and freezing it. He raised his sword and blocked the head of the Mesfi family's axe. Why are you angry? Since you want to kill me, the Mesfi family doesn't even have the resolve to be killed? Facing the head of the Mesfi family, who was extremely close to him and looked as if he wanted to eat him alive, Gray's expression was calm. His gaze was indifferent as he mocked. Whoosh! Hearing Gray's mockery, the head of the Mesfi family's eyes became even redder and bloodshot. Like an angry beast, after his axe was blocked, he suddenly lifted his right leg and kicked toward Gray with great force. The strong wind that was stirred up blew away the surrounding snow. One could imagine the strength of his kick. Whoosh! Just as his kick was about to hit, Gray's figure disappeared and his kick landed in the air. All of a sudden, a leg wrapped in a huge movement no less than his just now kicked toward him from the side. Bang! He couldn't dodge in time and was kicked in the waist. The place where he was kicked was burning with pain. His body flew backward for dozens of meters and smashed a pit on the ground, splashing snow everywhere. Swish! As soon as he fell to the ground and got up, a 2-meter-long ice-green wind blade was already in his sight. He immediately had goosebumps and used his blood beast ability. An earth snake rolled out and met the wind blade while he retreated quickly. Poof! Without exception, the earth snake was split into 2 halves. The cold air spread in all directions and froze the earth snake. Not only that, but the cold air also attacked him while he was retreating quickly. Crack! Crack! Even if it was just the aftermath of the cold air, fine ice crystals formed on his body. His skin had turned green from the cold, and his body had become stiff. Swish! At this moment, he actually saw another icy green frost wind blade flying towards him. He hurriedly tried to dodge to the side, but he realized that because of the cold air attack, his movements were not as fast as usual. It was as if he was moving in liquid air. He couldn't dodge. Not good, he cursed inwardly. Gritting his teeth, he activated the power of blood and the ability of the blood fiends to the maximum. Several earth snakes rolled up and quickly merged into a huge earth snake that was more than 20 meters long and several meters thick. Crack! The oncoming ice wind blade was smashed by the huge earth snake. The surface of the earth snake was covered in ice. However, the earth snake was too big for the ice to completely freeze it. It only froze a part of the earth snake's body. The earth snake rushed forward quickly as if it had a life of its own and collided with Gray. Boom! Snow splattered everywhere, and a huge pothole appeared where Gray had been. Gray was not dead. Before the earth snake collided with him, Gray jumped back and dodged. However, the attack of the huge earth snake did not stop because of this. Its huge body floated up and once again collided with the retreating Gray. Swish, 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 swish. While retreating, 5 ice green wind blades suddenly appeared in front of Gray. They whizzed out and slashed at the earth snake. Crack! Crack! The 5 ice wind blades slashed at the front, middle, and back of the earth snake. They cut into the interior of the earth snake, but failed to cut it into pieces. The huge earth snake had a diameter of several meters and was as hard as metal. Even with the sharpness of the ice wind blades, it was difficult to cut it. However, the power of the ice wind blades did not only lie in the cutting power of the wind blades. Currently, the most powerful aspect of the ice wind blades was the extremely cold ice attribute. With the area slashed by the ice wind blades, as the center, icy cold air spread in all directions. Crack! 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 On the surface of the huge earth snake, ice spread out from 5 areas. Finally, the huge earth snake was completely frozen and could no longer move. Not only is he a berserker, but his blood fiend ability is also stronger than mine. Seeing the earth snake frozen, the expression of the head of the Mesty family changed slightly. The blood fiend ability that the other party used was much stronger than his blood fiend ability. Could it be that the other party practiced a special blood technique? But wasn't the other party a descendant of a Viscount family? How could he have a special blood technique? Could it be that there was a mutation in his bloodline? At this moment, he had already seen Gray's cold face rushing towards him, accompanied by a wind blade slashing towards him. Whoosh! He hurriedly used his blood fiend ability. An earth snake went against the wind blade while he retreated quickly to avoid the spread of the cold air. Poof! The ice wind blade slashed past, and the earth snake's body was cut into 2. It was frozen and fell to the ground with a bang. He had avoided the spread of the cold air, but before he could heave a sigh of relief, suddenly, a long sword with lightning wrapped around it, accompanied by a crackling sound, was attacking him quickly. His expression changed. He did not have time to use his blood fiend ability and swung his axe with great force. Whoosh! But he was surprised to find that the axe had hit nothing. The long sword with lightning wrapped around it had slightly deviated its direction and swept towards his waist from the other side. Crackle! He only felt pain at his waist before he was enveloped by blue-white lightning and was sent flying. Bang! He landed heavily on the ground. A hideous wound appeared at his waist where the long sword had slashed him. However, it did not bleed. Instead, it was charred black. In addition, his light brown hair was charred and emitted a charred smell. Enduring the numbness, he got up from the ground. Crackle! The sword that was accompanied by lightning once again slashed at his chest. Once again, he was sent flying. The hideous wound on his chest was charred black. Chapter 267. BZZT, 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 BZZT. A strange scene appeared in the snow. A man was struggling to get up. Every time he struggled to get up, a lightning sword would strike his body and send him flying. As a berserker, the head of the Mesfi family had a strong resistance against lightning. In addition, Gray was afraid of the Orca family and didn't want to kill the head of the Mesfi family, so he didn't use his full strength. Therefore, even though the head of the Mesfi family was electrocuted by the lightning on Gray's sword, he didn't lose his ability to move. Although his body was extremely numb and trembling, he still relied on his strong will to get up. However, before he could get up and do anything, Gray had appeared beside him and struck him with his sword again. One strike, and another strike. There were more than a dozen charred wounds on his body that didn't bleed. In the end, he couldn't get up anymore and could only lie in the snow, his body trembling as if he was having an epileptic seizure. How was it? Not bad, right? Looking at the trembling head of the Mesfi family, Gray looked down at him and mocked him. Just because you have some strength, you are unscrupulous, robbing mercenaries and hunting others. You never thought that you would have such a day, right? Gray, Fu, Gus, Oka, clan, the head of the Mesfi family who was numb from the electrocution, couldn't even speak properly. It was just a few words, but it took him a whole minute to say them. Gray interrupted him impatiently. Are you trying to say that if I kill you, the Orca family won't let me go? Don't worry, I won't kill you. As for the Orca family, don't expect them to avenge you. Gray looked at him with a mocking gaze. I am a berserker with potential, and I am valued by the Sidney family. Do you think the Orca family will offend the Sidney family and avenge you just because you provoked me and got injured by me? The head of the Mesfi family's face was distorted. His eyes were red and flashed with extreme anger. This time, they were the ones who took the initiative to attack the other party. Although there were deaths, there were nobles of the Mesfi family, and not the Orca family. The Orca family didn't care about their lives. The other party was so young and already had the strength of a berserker. It was certain that the Sidney family valued him. If the Orca family attacked him, it would be inevitable to offend with the Sidney family. In addition, the Sidney family had always been ranked at the top of the 7 marquee families. They were stronger than the Oka family. It was very likely that the Oka family wouldn't stand up for him. He was extremely furious. He resisted the numbness all over his body and wanted to use his blood fiend ability. Crackle, crackle. Bam, 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 bam. The blue-white lightning once again wrapped around his body and interrupted his use of the blood beast. Gray looked at the other party with disdain. He squatted down and took off the leather belt around his waist. After weighing it, he looked inside. Only 10,000 gold coins. You are really poor as the head of the Count family. Bastard. The head of the Mesfi family's face was flushed with blood. He clenched his teeth and wanted to bite off a piece of meat from Gray. Not only did he snatch his money pouch, but he also complained that the money in the pouch was too little. There is nothing more humiliating than being humiliated like this as the head of the Count family. Moreover, he left in a hurry this time. Moreover, he didn't come here to participate in an auction. Naturally, he didn't bring too much money with him. Bam! Gray kicked him in the face and sent him flying. He picked up the axe that had fallen to the ground and went to search the bodies of the other 2 people. A knife, a sword, and 2 money pouches added up to a few thousand gold coins. To him, who was heavily in debt, it was better than nothing. He then looked for the 3 horses, but found that they were nowhere to be found because of the battle just now. He could only shake his head and give up. It's those 4 people. Gray looked in the direction of the green-haired young man and his companions. He didn't say anything and returned to the carriage with his weapons. He signaled his servant duo Li to continue on their way. He wouldn't do anything to them just because they were watching the battle. Moreover, he was a little afraid of the four people. The clothes on the green-haired young man and the green-haired young woman were made from the fur of the blood beast. They were definitely high-end goods. The siblings' identities were probably not ordinary. Gray's carriage left, and the green-haired young man's carriage came from behind. Hearing the sound of the carriage, the head of the Mesfi family, who could already move slightly, had a thought. He stood up shakily and shouted at the carriage. "Stop!" The weather was cold, and the horses were nowhere to be found because of the fright just now. With his severely injured body, it was not impossible to walk to the nearest city, but it would definitely be extremely painful. Hearing his shout, the carriage stopped. The window was opened, and a handsome face appeared by the window. The head of the Mesfi family was delighted and said in a tough tone, "I am Count Mesfi. Send me to the nearest city, and you will receive a reward from the Mesfi family." He believed that with the reputation of the Mesfi family in Oka, the other party would definitely agree and respectfully send him to the nearest city. "Sorry, it's full. You'd better walk there yourself." However, in the next moment, he couldn't help but be stunned. The green-haired young man said apologetically, but his apologetic face was clearly filled with mockery. "You cough, cough." The head of the Mesfi family's face instantly darkened. Because of his anger, his injuries were affected, and he immediately coughed violently. Losing to Gray Fergus had already made him extraordinarily angry. He wanted to stop a carriage and rush to the nearest city, but he was met with such treatment. When did the status of the Mesfi family become so unbearable? Elijah laughed mockingly, closed the window, and ordered the carriage to continue moving forward. How could he be interested in a reward from a count's family? Of course, the reason why he wanted to tease the other party was mainly because the other party's commanding tone made him very unhappy. Since young, he was the only one who ordered others, and no one had ordered him. "Bastard, cough, cough." The head of the Mesfi family roared angrily as he looked at the carriage in the distance, which resulted in another bout of violent coughing. The cold wind whistled and slapped his severely injured body, causing him to shiver uncontrollably. The clothes on his body were already torn. At this moment, it was not an exaggeration to say that his clothes did not cover his body. He gritted his teeth and could only walk step by step to the nearest city. After walking for a few hours, he finally arrived at the nearest city in the evening. After contacting the Mesfi family, he immediately had someone write a letter and asked the Mesfi family to quickly send it to the Orca family. Although he did not have much hope, he still had to try. A few days later, there was a reply from the Orca family. The general content of the letter was that the Orca family would denounce the Sydney family on his behalf. After reading this, how could he not understand the Orca family's intentions? He was so angry that he could not help but cough again. Denouncing, that was just lip service. What was the use? Obviously, the Orca family did not intend to take the risk of offending the Sydney family by standing up for him. What he did not know was that not long after his letter was sent to the Orca family, another urgent report was sent to the Orca family. The content of the letter was that Marquis Sydney was driving the copperback dragon through the border of the territory. Originally, the Orca family did not want to stand up for the Mesfi family. After all, the Mesfi family brought this upon themselves. Although Earl Mesfi embellished a lot in the letter and made it sound as if he was the one in the right, unfortunately, the Orca family's intelligence was not just for show. With just a simple investigation, they completely understood the whole process of the conflict. They also knew that the reason why Earl Mesfi was injured was because he provoked them. Obviously, the Orca family was not willing to offend the Sydney family and stand up for the Mesfi family for such an unreasonable reason. Later on, the urgent news of the copperback dragon appearing at the border of the Orca family made the Orca family immediately decide not to stand up for it. The head of the Mesfi family did not know how important Gray was in the Sydney territory. He did not even know that the Fergus family was already an Earl's family. However, the Orca family knew. If something happened to Grey Fergus in the Marquis Orca territory, it was not impossible for the Sydney family to drive the Copperback Dragon into the Marquis Orca territory. With the destructive power of the Copperback Dragon, it would be disastrous if it wreaked havoc in the Orca territory. They could not even stop it because the Orca family did not have that kind of power. Under such circumstances, the Orca family naturally would not choose to attack Grey Fergus just because an earl was injured. It seems that the Orca family has no intention of standing up for the Mesty family. The carriage drove out of the Marquis Orca territory, and Grey, who had been slightly on guard, was completely relieved. Since the Orca family had not appeared until now, it was unlikely that the Orca family would stand up for the Mesty family. Although he estimated that the Orca family would not stand up for the Mesty family, an estimate was an estimate after all, and it was not absolute. Therefore, he had been on guard for the past few days in case the Orca family attacked. Of course, even in the worst-case scenario, the Orca family would at most teach him a lesson and not kill him. After all, he did not kill Earl Mesty. Relatively speaking, if the Orca family made a move, they would not go overboard. Time is too tight. Otherwise, we could have avoided the Marquis Orca territory. He did not know if Rob Tracy was still alive, but he did not want to put his life on the assumption that Rob Tracy was dead. He preferred to think of things in the worst-case scenario. He wanted to be able to resist in the worst-case scenario. Therefore, he needed to race against time to get at least the barbarian-level wind element special blood as soon as possible. Chapter 268. 2 days later, a huge city appeared before Grey's eyes. This was a city shrouded in wind and snow, covered in ice and snow. The city walls were covered in a thick layer of snow. The roofs of the buildings within the city walls were also covered in cotton-like snow. It was like a world of ice and snow. This was Mercenary City. The carriage entered the city and appeared on a wide street that could accommodate several carriages side by side. "Young Master Grey, where are we going now?" Dolly, the servant driving the carriage, asked Grey who was in the carriage. Opening the window, Grey looked out and saw that the streets were lined with shops. Grocery stores, livestock stores, weapon stores, medicine stores. Even though it was winter, there were still people going in and out. Many of these people wore leather armor on the inside and a large coat on the outside. It was obvious that there were many mercenaries in this city. I wonder where the Red Wing is stationed. Arriving here, Grey couldn't help but think of the Red Wing that he had met in the Redleaf Forest. Back then, they had invited him to their station as a guest, and their station was in Mercenary City. If he had the help of this local tyrant, it would be much more convenient for him to come to Mercenary City to purchase blood fiends. At the very least, he would be much more well-informed. After some thought, Grey ultimately decided to give up. He wasn't familiar with the Red Wing. At most, they had cooperated once while being on guard against each other. They couldn't be considered friends. Spend some money and find someone to guide us to the largest place in the city that buys and sells blood fiends, he said to his servant, Dolly. The blood he wanted purchased was the blood of a barbarian-level blood fiend. Ordinary small shops certainly didn't have it, so Grey's target was the largest shop in Mercenary City. Moreover, although Grey would keep a portion of the blood of the berserk-level blood fiends that he had hunted in the Night Forest, he was prepared to sell the majority of it. "Yes, young Master Grey." Dolly answered and left. A man dressed as a mercenary was quickly tempted by a silver coin, and he immediately agreed to guide them. Under the guidance of the mercenary, the carriage followed the streets, turning left and right. After about half an hour, it suddenly opened up. The first thing that came into view was a huge plaza. More than 10 carriages were parked in the plaza. Many of the carriages were luxuriously decorated, and it was obvious that the owners of the carriages weren't simple people. At the end of the square, there was a huge 3-story building standing tall. The building had distinct corners. Although it was huge, it was rather exquisite. It could be seen that a lot of effort had been spent when it was first built. On the building, the words Lex's Merchants Association were engraved. The words had a golden metallic luster. Grey guessed that after the words were engraved, a layer of gold had been added. Quite rich and overbearing. Using gold as a signboard, and such a huge one at that, it must have cost a lot of gold. Lex? Could this be the property of the Lex family, the king of mercenaries' family? With these thoughts in mind, Gray stepped down from the carriage. Wait for me here. Gray took out the blood of the blood fiends that he wanted to sell from the rune space bag and put it in the carriage. He instructed Dolly and walked toward the entrance of the huge building. Upon entering, they were greeted by a huge hall. There were all kinds of counters in the hall. The bottom of the counters was made of high-quality wood, and the top was polished with transparent crystal. Through the crystal, one could clearly see the items inside. In addition, there were words beside the counters, introducing the items on the counters. Glenn took a glance and found that there were classifications of herbs, weapons, blood fiends, and so on. Young master, may I know what you need? At the entrance, a few beautiful girls stood respectfully. They were wearing dresses that were similar to maid outfits, but slightly different from maid outfits. The slightly tight-fitting dresses revealed their beautiful figures. As soon as Gray entered the building through the door, a young girl came forward to greet him. She bowed slightly to Gray and asked in a soft and polite manner, "I need to buy some blood fiends, barbarian level." Gray nodded to the other party and said, "Blood of barbarian level blood fiends." Hearing Gray's words, the girl was stunned for a moment, but she quickly recovered. At the same time, the smile on her face became wider. "Okay, barbarian level blood fiends are only sold on the second floor. Please follow me." The blood of a barbarian level blood fiend could be sold for a few thousand gold coins per serving. Even in this high-class chamber of commerce, it was considered a rather expensive item. After all, this was the Lex family's property. There were people who wanted to buy the blood of barbarian-level blood fiends. The girl was stunned for a moment, but she quickly recovered. Under the guidance of the girl, they walked to the end of the hall. Stepping on the fur-lined stairs, Gray arrived at the second floor of the business. On the second floor, there were similar counters to those on the first floor, but there were fewer of them. Behind each counter, there was a person who was dressed well and had a steady aura. If Gray's guess was correct, these people should have cultivated blood techniques before, and their realms should not be low. After all, the items on the second floor were of high value. Without a certain level of ability, it was easy for them to be stolen. The girl led Gray to one of the ring-shaped counters. The counter was filled with all sorts of round crystal containers. Within the crystal containers, there were liquids. Most of these liquids were red, but there were a few that were blue, green, and so on. "May I know what type of blood fiend are you looking for?" Behind the counter, there was a brown-haired, charming lady. Seeing the girl leading Gray to the counter, she asked, "Blood of a barbarian-level wind-type blood fiend." Gray said directly, "This way, please." The charming lady was not surprised. Those who came to the second floor would not buy anything of low quality. She elegantly extended her hand, revealing her fair arm, and led Gray to one of the ring-shaped counters. Gray looked over and saw that there were 3 round, 1-liter crystal bottles on the counter. In the left crystal bottle, the words Storm Eagle were written. In the middle crystal bottle, the words Storm Lion were written. In the right crystal bottle, the words Storm Wolf were written. Gray scanned through them one by one and could not help but be slightly disappointed. He recognized all 3 types of blood fiends. They were indeed wind-type blood fiends of the barbarian level. However, according to the description in the book, the power of these blood fiends was only average among the barbarians. He raised his head and looked at the charming lady. "Do you have the blood of a special wind-type blood fiend of the barbarian level?" "A special wind-type blood fiend of the barbarian level?" Hearing Gray's question, the charming lady looked at Gray and shook her head slightly. "I'm sorry, we do not sell the blood of a blood fiend of that level." "You don't sell it? That means you have the blood of a blood fiend of that level?" Gray keenly grasped the meaning behind her words. "Yes, our Chamber of Commerce does have the blood of a blood fiend of that level." The charming lady nodded her head proudly. Not to mention the blood of a special barbarian-level blood fiend. The Chamber of Commerce even had the blood of a desolate-level blood fiend. She was sure that in the entire Purple Moon Kingdom, there were no more than 5 forces that were comparable to the Chamber of Commerce in terms of blood fiend collection. This was something that she had always been extremely proud of. However, the blood of that type of blood fiend is too precious and will not be sold at a public price. Instead, it will be sold in an auction every once in a while. When will the next auction be held by the Lex Chamber of Commerce? In a week's time. Can you help me check if there is any special wind-type blood fiend of the barbarian level? All right, please wait a moment. The charming lady left and returned after a short while. She then said to Gray, "The next auction will be held in the next auction. The next auction will have the blood of a special wind-type blade weasel. If you want to participate, please come at noon a week from now." Blade weasel? Gray's eyes suddenly lit up. Blade weasel was a barbarian-level blood fiend of the same order as the knife weasel he had killed previously. It was indeed a special wind-type blood fiend. This trip to Mercenary City was the right one. Even though he did not manage to buy the blood of a barbarian-level wind-type blood fiend, he managed to get some information about it. Now that the matter of the barbarian-level wind-type blood fiend had been settled, Gray thought of another reason for his visit and asked the middle-aged lady, "I have a batch of blood of a mad-level blood fiend. Can I sell it here?" "Sure." The charming lady smiled and nodded her head. She had thought that the transaction had failed and did not expect Gray to still want to sell the blood of a mad-level blood fiend. She immediately smiled. "There are a total of 12 mad-level blood fiends. That's quite a lot. Can you call a few people over to help me move them?" "Of course." The charming lady's smile became even wider. The blood of 12 mad-level blood fiends was not a small business, even for the Lex Chamber of Commerce. She personally led 10 shop assistants and followed Gray to the carriage to move the blood fiend's blood. In the end, a total of 24 rune bags were moved to the front of the circular counter. Last time, Gray had hunted a total of 15 mad-level blood fiends. Among them, 3 of them were wind-type blood fiends. Gray had already handed them over to Earl Fergus to assist the people in the castle in their daily training. After placing all the rune bags in front of the counter, the charming lady took out a thick book from one of the drawers of the counter. This was a book made of metal. Each page was a flat piece of metal. All the pages added together were at least 10 centimeters thick. It was not light, but the charming lady was able to move it out with ease. Obviously, Gray's previous guess was correct. The charming lady had indeed practiced blood techniques. Grim looked at the metal pieces on the pages and saw that there were many pictures of blood fiends on each of the metal pieces. Below the pictures, there was a label indicating the name of the blood fiend represented by the picture. Appraisal book. Looking at the pictures and labels, Gray immediately guessed the use of this book. It should be a book that could identify the type of blood fiend. Chapter 269. If he guessed correctly, this should be the Book of Appraisal. The Book of Appraisal was a rune book created by a rune master. It had the ability to identify the type of blood fiend. Every pattern on the book was drawn using the bones of the corresponding blood fiend that had been ground into powder and added with special materials. When it came into contact with the blood of the corresponding blood fiend, its color would change. Through this method, one could identify the type of blood fiend. Sure enough, the charming lady's next action confirmed Gray's guess. She flipped to the location of the blood fiend marked on the book, dipped a clean bamboo stick in the blood, and dripped a drop of blood on the corresponding blood fiend pattern. Buzz! Suddenly, the corresponding pattern emitted a blood-red glow. The glow lasted for a long time before it finally dimmed and disappeared. After the charming lady weighed and recorded the blood, she began to test the next bag of blood. Appraise, weigh, record. After repeating this process for half an hour, the charming woman finally finished all the blood tests. Then, she did some calculations and looked at Gray with a smile. "Sir, in this batch of blood fiends, there are 217 portions of frenzied mantis blood, 278 portions of frenzied bull blood, 205 portions of frost tiger blood. There are a total of 3,120 portions. In our Chamber of Commerce, the price for a normal blood fiend is 300 gold coins per portion, which is 936,000 gold coins. Please confirm if the amount is correct." As she spoke, she passed the paper containing the blood fiend's portions to Gray. "This is the amount." Gray took it, did some calculations, and nodded. 300 gold coins per portion was not high, but it was not low either. Under normal circumstances, the auction price of a blood fiend's blood could reach 500 gold coins. However, this was after the high processing fee of the auction house. Moreover, Such a large amount of Blood Fiend's blood was not something that could be auctioned off in a short period of time. If he wanted to sell this blood in an auction, it would take a long time. It would probably be a year before he could get the money. Gray obviously could not wait that long, so he did not want to sell it in an auction. Instead, he chose to sell it directly. "Sir, please check it. 936,000 gold coins were 9,300 magic power coins." Soon, a wooden box full of magic power coins was carried to Gray. In the box, the magic coins were neatly bundled into strips, and each strip contained 50 magic coins. No problem. Gray squatted down and counted the number. After confirming that there were no problems, he nodded to the charming woman. "That's great. Is there anything else you need?" The charming woman smiled. If this deal was successful, both she and the girl who led Gray here would be rewarded handsomely. "Do you have the blood of corpse fur apes?" Gray asked. "Corpse fur ape. I'm sorry, but what rank is this blood fiend?" The charming woman had a puzzled look on her face. As someone who specialized in selling and purchasing blood from blood fiends, she was quite knowledgeable. However, she had never heard of this type of blood fiend. This is a berserk-level blood fiend, one of the corpse apes. Its ability is to control the corpses of dead blood fiends. A voice sounded, but did not come from Gray. Instead, it came from behind the three of them. Behind the three of them, a young woman wearing a white leopard fur coat walked over. The woman had long, fiery red hair and an exquisite face. She was tall and slender, and her legs were long and slender. Coupled with a pair of white boots, her legs were even more prominent. Mississippi, seeing this person, the charming woman and the young girl beside her who was guiding Gray respectfully called out. Gray looked at the woman with a trace of surprise in his eyes. She was a very beautiful woman. Of course, this was not the reason why Gray looked at her with surprise. Gray was surprised because she could easily tell the origin and ability of the corpse fur ape. Even he had to search through the many books of the Sydney family for a long time before he found the name of the blood fiend. "I'm sorry, this type of blood fiend is extremely rare. Our Chamber of Commerce does not have the blood of this type of blood fiend." The red-haired young woman walked up to Gray and said apologetically, "It's fine." Gray shook his head. "I'll take my leave." Gray nodded at the red-haired woman. He lifted the heavy wooden box with one hand and turned to leave. Since he had achieved his goal, Gray did not continue to stay in the Lex Chamber of Commerce. Seeing Gray disappear up the stairs on the second floor, the charming woman said to the red-haired woman, "Miss, the auction next week originally did not have the blood of a special wind-type blood fiend. Why did you add the blood of a knife weasel at the last minute? Do you know this person?" "No, but he's acquainted with my friend." The red-haired young woman smiled. After leaving the Lex auction, Gray found an inn to stay in. For the next few days, other than his daily training, he spent most of his time wandering the streets of Mercenary City. He found a tour guide and asked him to bring him to one shop after another that bought and sold blood. He wanted to see if he could find the blood of the corpse fur ape. Unfortunately, after several days of visiting almost all the shops that bought and sold blood in Mercenary City, he still could not find the blood of the corpse fur ape. Obviously, as the red-haired woman had said, the corpse fur ape was an extremely rare blood fiend. "Let's go. There's a duel at the arena." "What? There's a duel? I haven't seen a duel in half a month." "Let's go and take a look." Following the tour guide, Gray walked on the streets. Suddenly, he saw a commotion among the crowd on the streets, all of them surging in one direction. What kind of place is the arena? Gray looked at the tour guide in confusion. This was a young man in his 20s. He had a shallow scar on his face made by a wild beast, which made him look more mature than his age. That's where the mercenaries of Mercenary City settle their conflicts. Once you enter the arena, life and death are determined. The young man said with a serious expression. Once you enter the arena, life and death are determined. Hearing this, Gray could not help but turn serious. He had not expected Mercenary City to have such a unique rule. Just from the fact that life and death were determined, one could tell how unusual this duel was. It was easy to imagine how bloody and cruel this duel would be. Mercenary City actually allowed such a place to settle conflicts. From this, It was not difficult to see the difference between Mercenary City and the cities ruled by nobles. Let's go and take a look. Gray decided to follow and take a look. After a few days, he had already visited all the places he needed to visit. He no longer held any hope for the blood of the corpse fur ape, so he might as well go and see what this life and death arena was like. The two of them followed the crowd and surged into a large building that was similar to the Roman arena in his previous life. The building was like an upside-down hemispherical shape, with many rows of stairs leading downwards. The innermost part of the building was straight downwards, forming an area about 100 meters in diameter covered in mud and gravel. That was the area where the battle would take place. At that moment, there were already 2 people standing in that area. With his powerful physique, Gray and the young mercenary squeezed to the edge of the spectator platform and looked inside. One of them was a skinny man with a triangular face. He was wearing a green battle suit, and his body was extremely thin, like a green bamboo pole. His weapons were 2 short blades. The short blades in his hands gave off the feeling of a green, praying mantis revealing its scythe. The other person wore green battle armor and had a medium build. He held a blade in his hand, and the tip of the blade was already touching the ground. It's him. Seeing this person, Gray cried out in surprise, because he knew him. More than a year ago, in the Red Leaf Forest, Gray had encountered a mercenary group called the Red Wing and had worked together with them to kill the Jade Lizard. And this person in front of him was the leader of the Red Wing. When he first arrived at Mercenary City, he thought about whether to visit the leader, but he gave up in the end. He did not expect to meet him in such a place. The man in the green battle armor stood not far from Gray. As if he felt Gray's gaze, he turned his head to look at Gray. When he saw Gray, he was slightly stunned, but soon showed a look of realization. It seemed that he recognized Gray. It's the leader of the Red Wing and the leader of the Mantis mercenary group. I didn't expect it to be a duel between these 2 people. Both of them are berserkers. This is going to be interesting. Next to Gray, several people whispered, "Are these 2 mercenary groups really because of the previous incident?" Someone who knew the inside story said thoughtfully, "What happened?" Someone who did not know asked doubtfully. The wife of a mercenary leader of the Red Wing was raped and killed by the son of the leader of the Mantis mercenary group. The mercenary leader went to seek revenge and was killed as well. What? How could he do such a thing? The son of the leader of the Mantis mercenary group is simply a bastard. What happened after that? Later, the leader of the Red Wing personally took action and killed the son of the leader of the Mantis mercenary group. Since then, the 2 mercenary groups have been in conflict. And this time, it seems that they are ready to completely resolve the conflict. They actually went to the duel. Next to them, Gray shook his head as he listened to the whole process of the conflict from these people's conversations. He sympathized with the Red Wing's experience. The whole conflict was instigated by the Mantis mercenary group, and the Red Wing was only forced to fight back. However, now that they were in the duel, it did not matter who was right or wrong. It only depended on who could survive in the end. He suddenly understood a little about the rules of the mercenary world, which was different from the world of the nobles. There was no right or wrong, only the strong or the weak. Compared to the nobles, the mercenaries tore apart the hypocritical camouflage and embodied the law of the jungle more vividly. Chapter 270. The Storm Mercenary Group is here. The Flamingo Mercenary Group is here too, and the Bloodhammer Mercenary Group. The duel had yet to begin, but a few strong mercenary groups had arrived one after another. The leaders of these groups all had steady auras, and their footsteps were either light or heavy. It was obvious that they were not weak. Miss Fermia, a few more people arrived. Seeing the leader of this group, the mercenaries actually made way for him. This kind of treatment was not given to the people of the previous mercenary groups. There were a total of 7 people in this group, and 3 of them were walking at the front. One of them was a beautiful young lady with a slender figure and fiery red hair. One of them was a handsome young man with green hair. The last person was a beautiful young lady with green hair that reached her waist. It's them. Seeing the 3 of them, Gray was slightly surprised. He knew the 3 of them. No, it should not be said that he knew them, but that he had seen them before. Gray had met the red-haired lady a few days ago at the Lex Merchants Guild. As for the green-haired man and the green-haired lady, he had met them a few times on the way to Mercenary City. Gray had already guessed the identity of the red-haired lady. From what he had heard over the past few days, he already knew that the Lex Merchants Guild was the business of the Lex family. Since the red-haired lady was called Miss by the people of the Lex Merchants Guild, she should be from the Lex family. It seems that the identity of this pair of siblings is not simple. To be able to stay with the Lex family without any difference in status, it was obvious that this pair of siblings was not simple either. Boom! Suddenly, there was a loud sound, which attracted Gray's attention from the three of them. Gray turned back to look at the duel arena. He saw that the leaders of the Red Wing and the Mantis mercenary group, who were originally tens of meters away, were already fighting. The leader of the Red Wing was holding a battle sword with both hands. On the battle sword, there was a green light surrounding it. The leader of the Mantis mercenary group was holding two swords that were shining with white light. Boom, boom, boom. The battle blade and the dual blades collided, and after a loud sound, both of them were forced to retreat by the huge shock. However, they quickly rushed forward again and collided with each other. As the two of them collided, cracks began to appear on the ground of the dueling ground. Dirt and stones were sent flying everywhere. Whoosh! In the midst of the battle, a pair of red wings that resembled a bird's wings suddenly appeared on the back of the Red Wing's commander. He then soared into the sky and descended from the sky. From top to bottom, he slashed his sword at the commander of the Mantis mercenary group. The leader of the Mantis mercenary group jumped back and dodged the attack. The leader of the Red Wing mercenary group chased after him. However, a pair of wings suddenly sprouted from the back of the leader of the Mantis mercenary group. He changed his direction in midair, dodging the sword that was slashing at him, and launched a counterattack at the leader of the Red Wing. There were two wings on each side of his back. The front pair was jade green, while the back pair was translucent. Clang, clang, clang. The battle between the two changed from the ground to the sky. After reaching the level of a blood berserker, one would be able to construct a part of the blood fiend's body through the power of blood for battle. However, under normal circumstances, very few people would do this. Gray had never used it before. It was not that he was unwilling, but it was a little flashy. Even though the body parts of the blood fiend were sturdy, they were definitely not as sturdy as weapons. Moreover, this method consumed a lot of power of blood, and the loss outweighed the gain. However, the bloodlines of the Red Wing and the Mantis mercenary group's leaders were the bloodlines of blood fiends that could fly. After construction, the bloodlines would be of great help in battle. Hence, the two of them chose to do this. Whoosh, whoosh. After a long battle, two red flames suddenly appeared on the red wings of the Red Wing mercenary group's leader. They quickly slashed at the leader of the Mantis mercenary group. Buzz! The leader of the Mantis mercenary group looked serious. The dual blades in his hands glowed white and suddenly turned into two light blades that were 2 meters long. They slashed at the two red flames. Boom! A violent explosion sounded. Flames splattered and a dazzling white light flashed. For a moment, the spectators could not help but close their eyes. Gray also closed his eyes. However, he did not stop paying attention to the battle. He was watching the battle through his infrared perception. Suddenly, his expression changed slightly, and he frowned slightly. He saw that the two red flames were shattered under the light blades of the leader of the Mantis mercenary group. The leader of the Mantis mercenary group used the shattered flames as cover and quickly rushed toward the leader of the Red Wing mercenary group. Boom! The ground trembled. Then, a figure fell heavily on the ground, creating a deep pit. It was the leader of the Red Wing mercenary group. He was lying on the ground, covered in blood. There was a heavy wound on his abdomen. Other than that, his left arm was missing. At this time, blood was spurting out from the broken arm. Defeated. The leader of the Red Wing mercenary group has lost. Many mercenaries could not help but shake their heads when they saw this scene. The leader of the Red Wing mercenary group was injured and had lost an arm. On the other hand, the leader of the Mantis mercenary group was unscathed. One could imagine the outcome of the battle. After understanding the whole process of the two sides turning hostile in their hearts, they were also quite biased toward the Red Wing. Unfortunately, now it seemed that the one who would die here would most likely be the leader of the Red Wing mercenary group. Poof! 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 Sure enough, the battle that followed was completely one-sided. Although the leader of the Red Wing mercenary group struggled to stand, he had lost an arm and a lot of blood. His combat strength was greatly reduced. As the battle continued, the injuries on his body increased. Leader, leader, there were choking and weak sobbing sounds. Gray looked over and saw more than 10 people looking sadly at the Red Wing mercenary group in the arena. Among them, a beautiful woman in a red combat suit was biting her red lips. Her face was sad. Gray had some impression of this woman. She was the woman who had followed the leader of the Red Wing mercenary group. Poof! Another knife stabbed into the chest of the Red Wing mercenary group's leader. When the leader of the Mantis mercenary group pulled out the knife, the leader of the Red Wing mercenary group fell weakly to the ground. He fell heavily to the ground, blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. Although he was not dead, it was obvious that he was not far from death. The leader of the Mantis mercenary group looked at him coldly. His eyes were cold. Your revenge has been avenged. Let them go. Looking at the leader of the Mantis mercenary group, who was looking down at him coldly, the leader of the Red Wing mercenary group pleaded. Dream on. I will not let anyone from the Red Wing mercenary group go. The leader of the Mantis mercenary group snorted coldly. Just wait. I will send them down to accompany you soon. You. Cough, cough. Because of his agitation, the leader of the Red Wing mercenary group coughed up blood violently. The blood even contained fragments of his internal organs. Leader. More than 10 people ran into the arena. They were the people that Gray had seen earlier, including the woman in the red combat suit. They all came to the side of the Red Wing mercenary group's leader with sorrowful expressions. The leader of the Mantis mercenary group saw this, but did not stop them. Instead, he had a cold smile on his face as he looked at these people as if they were prey. Leader, this is a healing potion. Drink it quickly. You'll be fine soon. The woman in the red combat suit had tears in her eyes. She took out a bottle of self-healing potion, opened the lid, and brought the potion to the lips of the leader of the Red Wing mercenary group. The leader of the Red Wing mercenary group shook his head slightly. Don't waste it. I know my own condition. Healing potions were good for treating injuries, but not all injuries could be healed. Serious injuries like the one on his body could no longer be healed by healing potions unless they were of a higher grade. However, that kind of medicine was very difficult to obtain. That was because only extremely experienced alchemists had a certain probability of concocting medicine of that level. It was extremely rare. They could still buy healing potions at auction houses at a high price. As for potions of a higher grade, they rarely appeared in auction houses, let alone get their hands on them. Leader, I beg you, drink it. The woman in the red combat suit sobbed as she begged. After being fed by the woman in the red combat suit, the leader of the Red Wing mercenary group drank the healing potion. A trace of color returned to his extremely pale face. Everyone in the stands who saw this scene, including Gray, could not help but shake their heads slightly. It looked like he was getting better, but it was actually just a momentary recovery of consciousness. His internal organs were all shattered. How could ordinary healing potions be able to heal him? After regaining some color, the leader of the Red Wing mercenary group said something to the woman in the red combat suit. He turned his head with difficulty and looked at Gray in the stands. His eyes finally fixed on Gray. Then, the woman in the red battle suit stood up and walked up the stairs to the spectator stand. Seeing her actions, many mercenaries consciously made way for her. Finally, she walked up to Gray and said in a sorrowful voice, Sir, our leader would like to invite you to meet him. Okay. Gray was slightly surprised that the leader of the Red Wing mercenary group would want to meet him before he died. However, he still agreed and followed the woman in the red combat suit. He actually knows the leader of the Red Wing mercenary group. This scene was naturally seen by the red-haired woman and the green-haired brother and sister. The three of them were somewhat surprised because as far as they knew, Gray had only arrived at Mercenary City not long ago. Gray first sensed a gaze on him when he arrived at the arena. He followed the gaze and saw the leader of the Mantis mercenary group looking at him with a cold expression. He ignored him and walked straight to the leader of the Red Wing mercenary group. Sir, I didn't expect that we would meet again under such circumstances. Cough, cough. The leader of the red-shirt mercenary group laughed bitterly. Yes. Gray could not help but sigh. Sir, I would like to ask a favor from you. What is it? Gray looked at the other party in confusion. I would like to entrust the Red Wing to you.